The collapse of the Second Dynasty around 2686 BC marked not merely the end of one ruling house, but the conclusion of Egypt's formative centuries of experimentation with unified rule. The political upheavals that characterized the final years of the early dynastic period had exposed fundamental weaknesses in the nascent pharaonic system. Regional governors wielded excessive autonomy, religious authority remained fragmented among competing priesthoods, and the very concept of kingship lacked the ideological foundation necessary to command absolute obedience across the vast expanse of the Nile Valley. When Djoser ascended to the throne as the first ruler of the Third Dynasty, he inherited a kingdom that functioned more as a loose confederation of semi-autonomous regions than a truly centralized state. The pharaoh's authority, while theoretically absolute, required constant military enforcement to maintain compliance from provincial administrators who often governed their territories as personal fiefdoms. Trade networks remained localized, with Memphis serving primarily as a military stronghold rather than the economic hub it would later become. Most critically, the religious legitimacy of pharaonic rule rested on uncertain foundations, as competing theological traditions from Upper and Lower Egypt had never been successfully synthesized into a coherent doctrine of divine kingship. The transformation that occurred during Djoser's reign represented a fundamental reimagining of Egyptian political philosophy. Rather than simply ruling as the most powerful among equals, a model that had characterized his predecessors, Djoser and his advisors developed an entirely new conception of royal authority rooted in divine identity. This revolutionary approach positioned the pharaoh not as a mortal ruler blessed by the gods, but as the living incarnation of Horus himself, the falcon-headed deity whose dominion over both earth and sky provided theological justification for absolute temporal authority. The practical implications of this ideological shift extended far beyond ceremonial protocol. Under the divine kingship model, opposition to pharaonic authority constituted not political dissent but religious sacrilege, fundamentally altering the relationship between ruler and subject. Provincial governors who had previously negotiated with the pharaoh as representatives of their regions now found themselves transformed into appointed administrators serving at the pleasure of a divine being whose commands carried the weight of cosmic law. This theological restructuring eliminated the traditional checks and balances that had limited royal power during the early dynastic period, creating the ideological framework for the unprecedented centralization that would characterize the Old Kingdom. The architectural manifestation of this new divine kingship appeared most dramatically in Djoser's step pyramid complex at Saqqara, where the pharaoh's eternal residence was conceived not as a tomb but as a cosmic machine designed to facilitate his continued divine functions after death. The complex's unprecedented scale and sophistication reflected not merely royal megalomania, but a carefully calculated demonstration of the pharaoh's supernatural capabilities. The massive limestone blocks, precisely cut and fitted without mortar, seemed to defy the technological limitations of the age, while the complex's intricate internal passages and chambers suggested knowledge of cosmic mysteries unavailable to ordinary mortals. Imhotep, Djoser's chief architect and vizier, played a crucial role in translating the theoretical concept of divine kingship into tangible reality. His innovations in stone construction techniques allowed for the creation of monuments whose permanence and grandeur provided physical evidence of pharaonic divinity. The step pyramid's six-tiered structure, rising nearly 200 feet above the desert floor, created a visual landmark visible for miles across the Memphis region, serving as a constant reminder of royal power to both subjects and potential rivals. The surrounding complex, with its elaborate ceremonial courts and subsidiary buildings, provided venues for religious rituals that reinforced the pharaoh's divine status while demonstrating the resources at his disposal. The establishment of Memphis as the Old Kingdom's administrative capital represented a strategic masterstroke that, consolidated pharaonic control over both geographic regions and economic resources. The city's location at the apex of the Nile Delta provided unparalleled advantages for governing a kingdom that stretched from the Mediterranean coast to the first cataract at Aswan. From Memphis, royal administrators could monitor and control the critical junction where the river's single channel divided into the multiple branches that irrigated Lower Egypt's agricultural heartland. This geographic position allowed the pharaoh to regulate trade flowing north to Mediterranean markets while simultaneously controlling access to Upper Egypt's gold mines and quarries. The city's rapid expansion during the Third Dynasty reflected its growing importance as the kingdom's nerve centre. Archaeological evidence reveals a dramatic increase in construction activity, with new residential districts, administrative buildings, and temple complexes spreading across both banks of the Nile. The royal palace complex, situated on elevated ground overlooking the river, provided the pharaoh with commanding views of the surrounding landscape while offering secure communications with regional administrators throughout the kingdom. Massive granaries constructed during this period could store sufficient grain to feed the capital's growing population during lean years, reducing Memphis's dependence on regional suppliers who might use food shortages as political leverage. The bureaucratic innovations introduced during the Third Dynasty established administrative structures that would govern Egypt for over 2 millennia. The creation of formal governmental departments, each headed by appointed officials responsible directly to the pharaoh, replaced the informal networks of personal loyalty that had characterized earlier administrations. The treasury, under the direction of a chancellor who ranked second only to the vizier in the governmental hierarchy, assumed a responsibility for collecting taxes, managing royal resources, and funding construction projects. The Department of Public Works coordinated massive infrastructure projects including irrigation systems, roads, and monuments, while the Department of Agriculture supervised the complex scheduling and resource allocation required for successful Nile flood management. The establishment of the nome system represented perhaps the most significant administrative innovation of the period. Egypt was divided into 42 nomes, 22 in Upper Egypt and 20 in Lower Egypt, each governed by a nomarch appointed by and answerable to the pharaoh. These administrative districts, based on natural geographic boundaries and traditional cultural divisions, provided manageable units for tax collection, judicial administration, and military recruitment. Unlike the hereditary provincial governors of earlier periods, nomarchs served at royal pleasure and could be transferred, promoted, or dismissed based on their performance and loyalty. Each nome maintained detailed records of agricultural production, population, and resources, creating an unprecedented database of information that allowed central planners to optimize resource allocation across the kingdom. Scribal schools established in major nome centers trained the literate bureaucrats necessary to maintain these records, while standardized accounting procedures ensured consistency in reporting methods. The resulting administrative apparatus provided pharaonic government with detailed knowledge of local conditions and resources that enabled more effective policy implementation and crisis response. The religious dimensions of nome administration reinforced the divine kingship ideology while providing additional mechanisms for royal control. Each nome maintained temples dedicated to local deities, but these religious institutions were increasingly integrated into the broader theological framework that positioned the pharaoh as the supreme intermediary between gods and mortals. Nomarchs assumed responsibility for ensuring proper religious observances within their territories, while temple priests received appointments that required royal approval. This religious bureaucratization eliminated potential sources of ideological opposition while creating additional channels for royal influence over local populations. The economic transformations accompanying administrative centralization fundamentally altered Egyptian society's structure and organization. The royal monopoly over long-distance trade, enforced through Memphis-based commercial networks, concentrated unprecedented wealth in pharaonic hands, while reducing regional elites' independent economic power. State-sponsored workshops producing luxury goods for royal consumption and diplomatic exchange employed thousands of specialized craftsmen whose livelihoods depended entirely on royal patronage. The resulting economic dependency created powerful incentives for loyalty among artisan classes who had previously maintained greater independence. Agricultural policy during the Third Dynasty reflected the new administration's sophisticated understanding of Egypt's ecological rhythms and resource management requirements. Royal agricultural advisors developed detailed planting schedules optimized for different soil types and flood conditions, while state-sponsored irrigation projects extended cultivation into previously marginal areas. The construction of strategic granaries throughout the kingdom created buffer stocks that could mitigate the effects of poor flood years, reducing the social unrest that had periodically threatened earlier dynasties. The military reforms accompanying administrative centralization created professional forces loyal to the pharaoh rather than regional commanders. The establishment of permanent garrisons at strategic locations throughout the kingdom provided rapid response capabilities for internal security threats, while demonstrating royal power to potentially rebellious populations. Military units recruited from different nomes were deliberately mixed to prevent the formation of regional loyalties that might threaten central authority, while career advancement opportunities attracted ambitious young men from throughout the kingdom to royal service. The judicial system developed during this period reflected the divine kingship ideology's emphasis on pharaonic authority as the ultimate source of law and justice. Royal courts established in major population centres administered standardized legal codes that superseded local customs and traditions, creating unified legal standards throughout the kingdom. Judges appointed by and responsible to the pharaoh replaced traditional councils of elders, while appeals procedures channeled disputes toward Memphis-based officials who represented royal rather than local interests. The cultural implications of these political and administrative transformations extended throughout Egyptian society, creating new forms of artistic expression, religious practice, and social organisation that would characterise the Old Kingdom for centuries. The concentration of resources and skilled craftsmen in Memphis fostered artistic innovations that reflected the new divine kingship ideology while demonstrating the pharaoh's supernatural capabilities. Monumental architecture, sophisticated sculpture, and elaborate decorative programs created visual vocabularies that communicated royal power to both literate elites and illiterate masses. The administrative and ideological foundations established during the early Third Dynasty created the necessary preconditions for the most revolutionary transformation in ancient Egyptian civilization, the complete reimagining of royal mortuary architecture under Pharaoh Djoser. When Djoser assumed the throne around 2670 BC, Egyptian royal burial practices remained fundamentally unchanged from those of the early dynastic period. Pharaohs continued to be interred in mastaba tombs, rectangular mud brick structures with flat roofs and sloping sides that housed burial chambers carved into the bedrock below. These monuments, while impressive by contemporary standards, reflected the technological limitations and modest resources available to earlier rulers rather than the unprecedented wealth and organizational capabilities that divine kingship ideology had placed at pharaonic disposal. The mastaba tradition represented more than architectural convention. It embodied specific theological concepts about royal afterlife that would prove incompatible with the evolving divine kingship doctrine. Traditional mastabas functioned as elaborate houses for the deceased, providing storage spaces for grave goods, offering chambers for mortuary rituals, and burial apartments where the pharaoh's mummified remains could rest undisturbed. This domestic model of royal afterlife reflected earlier concepts of kingship, that positioned the pharaoh as a powerful mortal who required supernatural assistance to navigate the dangers of death, rather than a divine being whose cosmic functions continued unchanged beyond the grave. Diosa's revolutionary decision to abandon mastaba construction in favour of an entirely new form of royal monument reflected the theological implications of divine kingship ideology. A pharaoh who was the living incarnation of Horus could not be housed after death in a structure that suggested mortality and dependence on divine protection. Instead, the royal tomb must demonstrate the pharaoh's continued divine status while providing facilities for the complex rituals necessary to maintain his cosmic functions. This theological requirement demanded architectural innovations that would challenge the technical capabilities of Egyptian craftsmen while creating monuments of unprecedented scale and sophistication. The selection of Saqqara as the site for Djoser's revolutionary tomb complex reflected careful strategic planning that extended beyond practical considerations of proximity to Memphis. The elevated plateau overlooking the capital city provided an ideal location for a monument designed to serve as a visible symbol of royal power, while the site's limestone bedrock offered superior construction materials and stable foundations for massive stone structures. More importantly, Saqqara's position on the western bank of the Nile aligned with Egyptian religious traditions that associated the West with the realm of the dead, while its commanding views of the surrounding landscape reinforced the pharaoh's role as divine protector of the kingdom. The appointment of Imhotep as chief architect for Djoser's funerary complex represented a crucial decision that would transform not only royal burial practices, but the entire trajectory of Egyptian civilization. Imhotep's background combined practical architectural experience with theoretical knowledge of engineering principles, mathematical relationships, and religious symbolism that proved essential for translating divine kingship ideology into physical reality. His previous work on palace construction projects had demonstrated mastery of traditional mud brick building techniques, while his position as royal vizier provided intimate knowledge of the administrative resources and organizational capabilities available for the unprecedented construction project. Imhotep's genius lay not in his technical innovations alone, but in his ability to synthesize architectural, engineering, and theological requirements into a coherent design that addressed multiple functions simultaneously. The step pyramid complex needed to serve as the pharaoh's eternal residence, a center for ongoing mortuary rituals, a demonstration of royal power, and a cosmic machine facilitating divine functions. These diverse requirements demanded architectural solutions that transcended traditional building practices while creating entirely new forms of monumental expression. The decision to construct the complex entirely in limestone represented a revolutionary departure from Egyptian building traditions that would require fundamental innovations in quarrying, transportation, and construction techniques. Previous royal monuments had employed limestone primarily for decorative elements and specialized architectural features, while relying on mud brick for structural components. The step pyramid complex would require hundreds of thousands of precisely cut limestone blocks, each weighing several tons and fitted together with tolerances measured in millimeters. This technical challenge demanded new approaches to quarrying that could produce uniform building stones, transportation systems capable of moving massive blocks across considerable distances, and construction techniques that could achieve unprecedented precision in stone placement. The quarrying operations established for the Step Pyramid project created the foundation for Egyptian stone construction techniques that would remain largely unchanged for millennia. Workers developed specialized copper tools designed specifically for limestone extraction, including chisels, saws, and wedges that could split massive blocks along predetermined lines. The quarry faces at Tura, located across the Nile from Saqqara, reveal evidence of systematic extraction methods that minimized waste while producing blocks of standardized dimensions. Wooden levers and copper wedges driven into carefully positioned holes allowed workers to separate blocks cleanly from the bedrock, while wooden sledges and rope systems facilitated transportation from quarry face to loading areas. The transportation of limestone blocks from Tura quarries to the Saqqara construction site required engineering solutions that demonstrated Egyptian mastery of logistics and mechanical principles. During the annual Nile flood, when the river reached its highest levels, specially constructed barges could carry multiple limestone blocks directly to temporary harbours constructed near the pyramid complex. These vessels, reinforced with additional wooden beams and equipped with specialised loading equipment, represented significant advances in naval architecture that would influence Egyptian shipbuilding for centuries. The coordination required to synchronise quarrying operations with flood cycles while maintaining steady supplies of building materials to construction crews demonstrated administrative capabilities that exceeded anything previously attempted in human history. The construction techniques developed for the step pyramid revolutionised Egyptian masonry practices through innovations that addressed the unique challenges of large-scale stone construction. Traditional mud brick building relied on mortar to bind individual elements together, but limestone construction demanded different approaches that exploited the material's inherent structural properties. Imhotep's architects developed dry stone construction methods that used precisely cut blocks fitted together without mortar, creating structures of unprecedented strength and durability. The accuracy required for this technique demanded new tools for measuring and cutting stone, including copper squares, plumb lines, and levelling instruments that could achieve tolerances impossible with earlier construction methods. The step pyramid's distinctive six-tiered profile emerged from practical construction considerations rather than predetermined aesthetic preferences. Imhotep's original design called for a traditional mastaba tomb, but the project's scope expanded repeatedly as Djoser's reign progressed and additional resources became available. Each construction phase added height and complexity to the monument, with the final design reaching nearly 200 feet above the surrounding plateau. The stepped profile resulted from the practical difficulties of constructing vertical walls at such unprecedented heights. While the pyramid's square base provided optimal structural stability for the massive stone superstructure, the internal architecture of the step pyramid reflected the complex theological requirements of divine kingship, while demonstrating sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles. The burial chamber, carved from solid granite and positioned deep beneath the pyramid's centre, was accessed through a vertical shaft that descended over 90 feet through limestone bedrock. This chamber's granite construction required transportation of massive stone blocks from quarries at Aswan, located over 500 miles south of Memphis, demonstrating the logistical capabilities and resource commitment that divine kingship ideology made available for royal projects. The pyramid's internal passage system created a three-dimensional maze designed to protect the pharaoh's burial, while providing access routes for mortuary priests responsible for ongoing ritual activities. These passages, lined with precisely fitted limestone blocks and decorated with carved reliefs depicting religious scenes, extended throughout the monument's interior and connected to subsidiary chambers that housed grave goods, ritual equipment and offerings. The complexity of this internal architecture required mathematical planning that demonstrated Egyptian mastery of geometric principles and spatial relationships. The step pyramid complex extended far beyond the central monument to encompass a vast ceremonial precinct that redefined concepts of royal mortuary architecture. The entire complex, surrounded by a limestone wall over 30 feet high and stretching more than a mile in perimeter, contained temples, courtyards, subsidiary tombs, and ceremonial buildings that provided venues for the elaborate rituals necessary to maintain the pharaoh's divine functions after death. This comprehensive approach to royal burial reflected the theological understanding that divine kingship required ongoing ritual support rather than simple interment of royal remains. The complex's architectural program incorporated sophisticated symbolic elements that communicated divine kingship ideology to both contemporary visitors and future generations. The entrance colonnade, featuring limestone columns carved to imitate bundled papyrus reeds, created a processional route that guided visitors through a series of architectural experiences designed to reinforce royal divine status. These columns, among the earliest known examples of stone architecture imitating organic forms, demonstrated the architect's ability to translate symbolic concepts into physical reality while creating new forms of architectural expression. The Hebsed court within the pyramid complex provided facilities for the ritual renewal ceremonies that confirmed the pharaoh's continued divine authority. This rectangular courtyard, flanked by dummy buildings representing the shrines of Upper and Lower Egypt, allowed for the performance of traditional ceremonies that had previously required travel to distant religious centres. The architectural recreation of these sacred spaces within the royal mortuary complex reinforced the pharaoh's role as supreme religious authority, while centralising important ritual functions under direct royal control. The religious significance of the step pyramid complex extended beyond its function as royal tomb to encompass its role as cosmic centre, linking earthly and divine realms. The pyramid's orientation aligned with cardinal directions and celestial phenomena, while its stepped profile created a symbolic stairway connecting earth and sky. This cosmic symbolism reflected sophisticated astronomical knowledge that allowed architects to incorporate celestial relationships into architectural design, creating monuments that functioned as three-dimensional representations of Egyptian religious cosmology. The complex's mortuary temple provided facilities for the ongoing ritual activities necessary to maintain the pharaoh's divine functions after death. This building, constructed entirely of limestone and decorated with elaborate carved reliefs, contained offering chambers where priests could present daily offerings of food, drink, and incense to the deceased pharaoh. The temple's architectural program included false doors that allowed the pharaoh's spirit to receive offerings, while maintaining separation between the world of the living and the divine realm of the dead. The technological innovations developed for the Step Pyramid project established construction techniques and organizational methods that would influence Egyptian architecture for over 2 millennia. The precision stone-cutting methods, transportation systems, and construction techniques pioneered at Saqqara provided the foundation for the even more ambitious pyramid projects of the Fourth Dynasty. The administrative structures created to coordinate the massive workforce required for construction established precedents for organizing large-scale public works projects that would characterize Egyptian government throughout the Old Kingdom period. The death of Joseph's successor Huni around 2613 BC marked the end of the Third Dynasty and the beginning of what would become the most architecturally ambitious period in human history. The accession of Sneferu to the throne inaugurated the Fourth Dynasty, bringing to power a ruler whose vision for royal mortuary architecture would surpass even Imhotep's revolutionary achievements at Saqqara. Where Djoser's step pyramid had demonstrated the possibilities of large-scale stone construction, Sneferu's reign would witness the development of true pyramid architecture through a series of experimental projects that pushed Egyptian engineering capabilities to their absolute limits. Sneferu inherited a kingdom whose administrative apparatus had been refined through nearly a century of divine kingship ideology, creating unprecedented organizational capabilities for massive construction projects. The Nome system established during the Third Dynasty now functioned with mechanical efficiency, channeling resources from throughout Egypt toward royal projects with minimal resistance from regional administrators. The bureaucratic structures developed at Memphis had evolved into sophisticated planning organizations capable of coordinating complex logistics across vast distances and extended time periods. Most importantly, the technological innovations pioneered at Saqqara had trained a generation of master craftsmen whose expertise in stone construction would prove essential for the architectural experiments that would define Sneferu's reign. The pharaoh's decision to abandon Saqqara in favour of Dahshur for his pyramid complex reflected both practical considerations and ideological motivations that demonstrated the continuing evolution of divine kingship concepts. Dahshur's location, approximately 20 miles south of Memphis, provided access to high-quality limestone quarries while offering sufficient space for the massive construction projects that Sneferu envisioned. The site's elevated position overlooking the Nile Valley created ideal conditions for monuments designed to serve as visible symbols of royal power, while its distance from the capital eliminated potential disruptions to ongoing governmental activities during the lengthy construction process. Sneferu's first pyramid at Dahshur, known today as the Bent Pyramid, represented an ambitious attempt to create a true pyramid structure that would surpass the step pyramid's architectural achievements. The monument's original design called for smooth-sided walls rising at an angle of approximately 54 degrees, creating a geometric form that would demonstrate mathematical precision while achieving unprecedented height. The construction began with confidence, using limestone blocks of exceptional quality fitted together with the dry stone techniques perfected at Saqqara. Workers quarried massive foundation stones from local deposits, while specialised crews transported facing stones from the Tura quarries across the Nile. The Bent Pyramid's distinctive profile resulted from engineering challenges that forced fundamental modifications to the original design during construction. As the monument approached its planned height, structural problems became apparent in the form of stress fractures appearing in the internal passages and chambers. The weight of the massive stone superstructure, combined with the steep angle of the pyramid's sides, created forces that exceeded the structural capabilities of the internal architecture. Rather than abandoning the project, Sneferu's architects implemented an innovative solution that reduced the pyramid's upper angle to approximately 43 degrees, creating the distinctive bent profile that gives the monument its modern name. The internal architecture of the Bent Pyramid demonstrated significant advances in engineering sophistication compared to earlier monuments. The burial chamber, constructed entirely of limestone blocks fitted together without mortar, featured a corbelled ceiling that distributed the weight of the superstructure across the chamber's walls, rather than concentrating stress on central support elements. This architectural innovation required precise mathematical calculations to determine the optimal angle for each course of stones, while the construction demanded unprecedented accuracy in stone cutting and placement. The chamber's smooth walls, polished to mirror-like perfection, reflected the advanced stoneworking techniques that Egyptian craftsmen had developed through decades of experience with monumental construction. The pyramid's passage system incorporated multiple entry points and complex internal routes that reflected evolving concepts of royal burial security. The main entrance, located on the pyramid's north face, led to a descending passage that connected to the primary burial chamber through a series of ascending corridors. A secondary entrance on the west face provided access to an upper chamber system that may have been intended for ritual purposes or additional burial facilities. These multiple access routes required careful coordination during construction to ensure proper alignment and structural integrity, while the passages themselves demonstrated mastery of precision stone cutting that allowed for perfectly fitted joints throughout the monument's interior. Despite the structural challenges that necessitated design modifications, the Bent Pyramid's completion provided invaluable experience that would inform Sneferu's subsequent architectural projects. The lessons learned during construction included improved understanding of stress distribution in large stone structures, refined techniques for calculating optimal pyramid angles, and enhanced methods for coordinating complex construction sequences. These technological advances, combined with organizational improvements in workforce management and resource allocation, created the foundation for even more ambitious projects that would define the remainder of Sneferu's reign. The construction of Sneferu's second pyramid, the Red Pyramid, represented the culmination of experimental pyramid building and the achievement of true pyramid architecture. Located approximately 1 mile north of the Bent Pyramid, this monument incorporated all the lessons learned from the earlier project while implementing design improvements that eliminated the structural problems that had plagued its predecessor. The Red Pyramid's angle of approximately 43 degrees, derived from the successful upper section of the Bent Pyramid, provided optimal balance between height and structural stability, while creating the smooth-sided profile that would become the standard for all subsequent pyramid construction. The Red Pyramid's limestone construction demonstrated the full maturation of Egyptian stoneworking techniques through innovations that achieved unprecedented precision in large-scale masonry. The monument's core consisted of roughly dressed limestone blocks quarried from local deposits, while the outer facing employed fine limestone from Tura that was cut and polished to create perfectly smooth surfaces. The interface between core and facing stones required precise fitting that eliminated gaps while ensuring structural integrity throughout the monument's height. This construction method, combining efficiency in core construction with aesthetic perfection in facing work, established the standard approach for pyramid building that would be employed at Giza and subsequent royal monuments. The Red Pyramid's internal architecture reflected the accumulated expertise of Egyptian architects in designing burial chambers capable of withstanding enormous structural loads. The 3 chambers within the monument featured corbelled ceilings constructed with mathematical precision, while the connecting passages maintained perfect alignment despite the complex geometric relationships involved in their layout. The burial chamber, positioned deep within the pyramid's core, was accessed through a descending passage that extended over 200 feet from the entrance to the chamber floor. This extended approach provided additional security for royal burial while demonstrating the architect's ability to maintain precise alignment over considerable distances. The completion of the Red Pyramid around 2605 BC established Sneferu as the most prolific pyramid builder in Egyptian history, with a combined stone volume in his monuments exceeding that of his more famous successor, Khufu. The technological innovations and organizational methods developed during Sneferu's reign created the foundation for the architectural achievements of the Giza complex, while the trained workforce and refined construction techniques would prove essential for the even more ambitious projects that would follow. The pharaoh's pyramid building activities also established precedents for royal construction projects that would influence Egyptian architecture for centuries, creating expectations for pharaonic monuments that would drive continued innovations in engineering and construction. Khufu's accession to the throne around 2589 BC brought to power a ruler whose vision for royal architecture would surpass even his father's remarkable achievements. The new pharaoh's decision to relocate royal pyramid construction to Giza reflected both practical considerations and symbolic motivations that demonstrated the continuing evolution of divine kingship ideology. Giza's limestone plateau provided ideal conditions for massive construction projects, with high-quality building stone available directly at the construction site and elevated terrain that offered commanding views of the surrounding landscape. The location's proximity to Memphis facilitated transportation of workers and materials while maintaining convenient access to the administrative apparatus necessary for coordinating complex construction projects. The Great Pyramid of Khufu represented the ultimate expression of 4th Dynasty architectural ambition through a monument whose scale and precision would never be equalled in ancient Egyptian construction. The pyramid's base covered over 13 acres, with sides measuring approximately 756 feet in length and achieving accuracy within mere inches of perfect square geometry. The monument's height of 481 feet created a structure visible from vast distances across the Nile Valley. while its smooth limestone facing, polished to brilliant white perfection, reflected sunlight with an intensity that made the pyramid appear to glow against the desert landscape. The Great Pyramid's construction required organizational capabilities that exceeded anything previously attempted in human civilization. Conservative estimates suggest that the monument contains over 2.3 million limestone blocks, with individual stones weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons. The quarrying, transportation and placement of this massive quantity of stone demanded coordination of thousands of workers over a construction period spanning approximately 2 decades. The logistics involved in supplying food, water and tools to this enormous workforce, while maintaining the precision necessary for accurate stone placement, created administrative challenges that pushed Egyptian governmental capabilities to their absolute limits. The pyramid's internal architecture demonstrated engineering sophistication that reflected centuries of accumulated experience in stone construction, combined with innovative solutions to unprecedented structural challenges. The Grand Gallery, ascending at an angle of 26 degrees through the pyramid's interior, featured a corbelled ceiling that rose to a height of 28 feet, while maintaining perfect structural stability under the enormous weight of the superstructure above. This architectural masterpiece required precise mathematical calculations to determine optimal stone placement, while the construction demanded stone-cutting accuracy measured in fractions of inches to achieve proper fit and alignment. The King's Chamber, positioned near the pyramid's centre and constructed entirely of red granite transported from quarries at Aswan over 500 miles to the south, represented the ultimate achievement in Egyptian precision masonry. The chamber's walls, floor and ceiling were cut from massive granite blocks fitted together with tolerances so precise that knife blades cannot be inserted between adjacent stones. The chamber's flat ceiling, composed of 9 granite beams each weighing over 50 tons, demonstrated mastery of structural engineering that allowed for the creation of large interior spaces within massive stone monuments. The transportation of these enormous granite elements from distant quarries to the Giza construction site required engineering solutions that pushed Egyptian logistical capabilities to their absolute limits. The pyramid's passage system incorporated multiple chambers and corridors that reflected sophisticated understanding of structural engineering combined with complex theological requirements for royal burial. The descending passage, cut through solid bedrock and lined with precision-fitted limestone blocks, extended over 300 feet from the pyramid's entrance to an unfinished chamber deep beneath the monument. The ascending passage, sealed with massive granite plugs after the pharaoh's burial, led to the Grand Gallery and ultimately to the King's Chamber through a series of architectural spaces that demonstrated unprecedented sophistication in 3-dimensional design. The construction workforce for the Great Pyramid represented a mobilization of human resources unparalleled in the ancient world, with recent archaeological evidence suggesting a permanent workforce of approximately 2,000 skilled craftsmen supplemented by rotating crews of up to 20,000 seasonal labourers. These workers were housed in purpose-built settlements adjacent to the construction site, complete with bakeries, breweries and medical facilities that provided comprehensive support for the massive workforce. The organisation required to feed, house and coordinate this enormous labour force demonstrated administrative capabilities that reflected the full maturation of Egyptian governmental systems developed over centuries of divine kingship. The pyramid construction process employed innovative techniques that maximised efficiency while maintaining the precision necessary for monumental architecture. Ramps constructed of limestone chips and mud brick provided access routes for moving massive stone blocks to increasing heights as construction progressed, while specialized teams of workers developed expertise in specific aspects of pyramid building, including quarrying, transportation, stone cutting, and placement. The coordination required to synchronize these diverse activities while maintaining steady progress toward completion created management challenges that drove innovations in project planning and resource allocation. The architectural triumphs of Sneferu and Khufu created an unprecedented demand for skilled artisans whose expertise extended far beyond the practical requirements of pyramid construction. The massive royal workshops established at Memphis, Dashur and Giza during the early 4th dynasty attracted craftsmen from throughout Egypt and beyond, creating concentrated centres of artistic production that would fundamentally transform Egyptian visual culture. These workshops, operating under direct royal patronage and supplied with the finest materials available throughout the known world, provided ideal conditions for artistic experimentation and innovation that would establish the canonical forms of Egyptian art for millennia to come. The development of standardized proportional systems during this period represented one of the most significant achievements in the history of artistic representation. Egyptian artists working on royal commissions developed mathematical frameworks for depicting the human figure that balanced naturalistic observation with idealized concepts of divine perfection appropriate for representing pharaonic subjects. The canonical proportional grid, based on divisions of the human body into 18 equal units from the soles of the feet to the hairline, provided a systematic method for achieving consistent representation across different scales and media while maintaining the dignified bearing considered essential for royal portraiture. This proportional system emerged from practical necessities encountered in decorating the vast interior spaces of pyramid complexes, where multiple artists working simultaneously needed to achieve visual consistency across extensive wall surfaces. The mathematical precision required for pyramid construction had trained Egyptian craftsmen in geometric principles that proved directly applicable to artistic representation, while the theological requirements of divine kingship demanded visual languages that could communicate royal perfection through systematic rather than accidental means. The resulting proportional frameworks eliminated the stylistic variations that characterized earlier Egyptian art, creating unified visual vocabularies that reinforced political messages about pharaonic authority and divine status. The application of these proportional systems to royal sculpture produced masterpieces that combined technical precision with psychological intensity previously unknown in Egyptian art. The seated limestone statues of Khafre, discovered in his valley temple at Giza, demonstrated the full maturation of 4th dynasty sculptural techniques through works that achieved unprecedented realism while maintaining the idealized dignity required for divine kingship representation. These sculptures, carved from single blocks of fine limestone and originally painted in naturalistic colors, presented the pharaoh as simultaneously human and divine, approachable yet awesome, familiar yet transcendent. The Khafre statues revealed sophisticated understanding of optical effects that allowed sculptors to create works that appeared different from various viewing angles, while maintaining consistent proportional relationships throughout. The pharaoh's face, carved with mathematical precision according to canonical proportions, nevertheless captured individual characteristics that made the portrait recognizably specific rather than generically royal. The subtle modelling of facial features, achieved through techniques that required years of training to master, created surfaces that responded to changing light conditions with lifelike vitality while maintaining the permanent dignity appropriate for divine representation. The sculptural treatment of royal regalia in these works demonstrated the artist's mastery of symbolic representation, combined with technical virtuosity in stone carving. The Nemes headdress, carved with individual pleats rendered in precise detail, created textural contrast that enhanced the sculpture's visual impact, while communicating specific theological concepts about pharaonic authority. The false beard, symbol of divine kingship, was integrated into the composition with mathematical precision that balanced symbolic requirements with aesthetic considerations. The throne, decorated with intricate relief carvings depicting the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, provided narrative context that reinforced the sculpture's political messages while demonstrating the artist's ability to work effectively across different scales of representation. The Great Sphinx, carved from a single outcropping of limestone during Khafre's reign, represented the ultimate fusion of architectural ambition with sculptural achievement that characterized 4th Dynasty artistic production. This colossal monument, measuring over 240 feet in length and rising 66 feet above the surrounding plateau, combined the pharaoh's human head with a lion's body to create a visual metaphor for royal power that transcended conventional artistic categories. The Sphinx's scale required innovative approaches to sculptural composition that could maintain visual coherence across vast dimensions while preserving the detailed craftsmanship necessary for effective royal representation. The technical challenges involved in carving the Sphinx pushed Egyptian sculptural techniques to unprecedented levels of sophistication. The monument's head, proportioned according to canonical standards despite its enormous scale, required precise mathematical scaling that maintained proper relationships between facial features while achieving the monumental impact appropriate for a work visible from great distances. The body, carved to suggest the powerful musculature of a resting lion, demonstrated anatomical knowledge that combined careful observation of natural forms with idealized concepts of strength and majesty appropriate for royal symbolism. The Sphinx's integration into the broader landscape of the Giza complex revealed sophisticated understanding of environmental design that treated individual monuments as components of larger artistic compositions. The sculpture's position, aligned with the causeway connecting Khafre's pyramid to his valley temple, created visual relationships that enhanced both monuments while establishing sightlines that guided visitors through carefully orchestrated architectural experiences. The Sphinx's gaze, directed toward the eastern horizon where the sun rose each dawn, incorporated astronomical symbolism that reinforced theological concepts about pharaonic divinity while creating temporal dimensions that connected the monument to cosmic cycles. The development of relief carving techniques during the 4th Dynasty established artistic standards that would influence Egyptian decorative programs for over 2 millennia. The limestone reliefs decorating pyramid temples and mastaba tombs achieved unprecedented refinement in both technical execution and compositional sophistication, creating narrative programs that combined religious instruction with aesthetic pleasure in ways that served multiple functions simultaneously. These relief programs employed the standardized proportional systems developed for sculpture while adapting those frameworks to the specific requirements of architectural decoration. The relief carvings in Khufu's satellite pyramids demonstrated the full maturation of 4th Dynasty decorative techniques through works that achieved extraordinary delicacy while maintaining the clarity necessary for effective visual communication. Individual figures, carved in low relief with surface modelling so subtle that it seemed to emerge naturally from the stone, were arranged in complex compositions that told coherent stories while maintaining perfect balance and proportion throughout. The hierarchical scaling employed in these compositions, where royal figures appeared larger than their attendants, according to systematic proportional relationships, created visual hierarchies that reinforced political messages while achieving aesthetic effects of remarkable sophistication. The standardization of hieroglyphic writing during this period represented achievements in linguistic systematization that paralleled developments in visual art while serving similar functions in communicating royal ideology. The royal scribal schools established at Memphis during the early 4th Dynasty developed standardized forms for hieroglyphic signs that eliminated regional variations while establishing consistent relationships between written symbols and their phonetic or ideographic meanings. These standardized writing systems enabled the production of the religious and administrative texts that could be understood consistently throughout the kingdom, creating unified literary cultures that reinforced political centralization. The religious texts produced during this period established theological frameworks that would influence Egyptian religious thought for millennia, while providing literary foundations for the divine kingship ideology that justified pharaonic authority. The pyramid texts, although not inscribed until the 5th dynasty, drew upon religious traditions that were systematized and codified during the 4th dynasty through the efforts of royal scribes working under direct pharaonic patronage. These texts combined ancient religious traditions with contemporary theological innovations that positioned the pharaoh as the central figure in cosmic dramas involving the creation, maintenance, and renewal of universal order. The administrative documents produced by 4th dynasty scribal schools revealed sophisticated approaches to record keeping that enabled the complex logistical coordination required for massive construction projects while creating precedents for governmental documentation that would characterize Egyptian administration throughout the Old Kingdom. Tax records, workforce rosters, and resource inventories were maintained with mathematical precision that reflected the same attention to systematic organization that characterized contemporary artistic production. These documents, written on papyrus using standardized scribal hands and conventional formatting, created archives that preserved detailed information about 4th dynasty society, while demonstrating the administrative sophistication that made possible the period's remarkable achievements. The development of sophisticated craftsmanship in luxury goods during the 4th dynasty reflected the unprecedented wealth concentrated in royal hands through the administrative systems perfected during the early Old Kingdom. Royal workshops producing jewellery, furniture, and decorative objects employed the finest materials available throughout the ancient world, including gold from Nubian mines, silver from Anatolian sources, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and cedarwood from Lebanese forests. The concentration of these exotic materials in Memphis-based workshops created opportunities for artistic experimentation that combined traditional Egyptian techniques with foreign influences in ways that expanded the vocabulary of Egyptian decorative arts. The jewellery discovered in 4th dynasty royal burials demonstrated technical mastery that achieved effects of extraordinary delicacy, while maintaining the symbolic clarity necessary for effective royal regalia. Goldworking techniques developed during this period included granulation, filigree, and cloisonne methods that created surface textures and colour combinations previously unknown in Egyptian metalwork. The famous gold jewellery of Queen Hetepheres, Khufu's mother, revealed sophisticated understanding of optical effects that allowed craftsmen to create pieces that appeared different under various lighting conditions, while maintaining consistent symbolic messages about royal status and divine protection. The furniture produced for 4th dynasty royal burials combined functional requirements with aesthetic considerations in ways that created new categories of decorative art. The cedarwood chair and bed discovered in Hetepheres' burial equipment demonstrated joinery techniques that achieved structural strength without visible mechanical fasteners, while the decorative programs applied to these pieces employed inlay work that combined precious metals with exotic stones in patterns of remarkable complexity. The symbolic programs incorporated into these decorative schemes drew upon the same canonical proportional systems employed in sculpture and relief carving, creating unified aesthetic approaches that reinforced royal ideology through multiple artistic media. The ivory carving techniques developed during this period achieved levels of technical sophistication that would never be surpassed in Egyptian decorative arts. Small-scale sculptures and decorative objects carved from elephant ivory imported from sub-Saharan Africa demonstrated mastery of three-dimensional composition that translated the monumental achievements of royal sculpture to intimate scales appropriate for personal use. These ivory works, often incorporating gold inlay and precious stone details, created luxury objects that combined practical functions with aesthetic refinement in ways that reflected the sophisticated material culture of 4th dynasty royal courts. The textile production during the 4th dynasty, although poorly preserved in the archaeological record, can be reconstructed through artistic representations that reveal sophisticated approaches to fabric design and clothing construction. The linen garments depicted in contemporary relief carvings and paintings demonstrated understanding of fabric behaviour that allowed for the creation of clothing that combined practical comfort with visual elegance appropriate for royal wear. The pleating techniques shown in artistic representations required mathematical precision in fabric cutting and sewing that paralleled the systematic approaches employed in other 4th dynasty crafts. The architectural and cultural achievements of the 4th dynasty rested upon a sophisticated social and administrative framework that had evolved continuously since Djoser's revolutionary reign. By the time Khufu commanded resources sufficient to construct the Great Pyramid, Egyptian society had crystallized into a rigidly hierarchical system where every individual's position, responsibilities and privileges were determined by their relationship to the divine pharaoh. This social structure, while appearing static to modern observers, represented a dynamic equilibrium that balanced competing interests while channeling the kingdom's human and material resources toward the massive projects that defined Old Kingdom civilization. At the apex of this social pyramid stood the pharaoh, whose divine status placed him entirely outside the normal categories of human society. The king was not merely the most powerful among Egyptian nobles, but existed as a living god, whose every action carried cosmic significance. This theological position required elaborate protocols that governed every aspect of royal behaviour, from the formal ceremonies that mark the pharaoh's daily routine to the complex rituals that surrounded royal audiences and public appearances. The pharaoh's physical person was considered sacred, with direct contact restricted to a small circle of purified officials who had undergone specific religious preparations. Even the king's clothing, food, and personal possessions were imbued with divine qualities that required specialized handling by priests and servants trained in the proper procedures for maintaining ritual purity. The practical implications of divine kingship extended throughout the governmental apparatus, where royal commands carried the authority of divine decree rather than mere political directives. Officials receiving pharaonic instructions were not simply following administrative orders, but participating in the implementation of cosmic will, a theological framework that eliminated traditional distinctions between religious and secular authority. This divine mandate provided pharaonic government with unprecedented legitimacy, while creating powerful psychological incentives for bureaucratic compliance that extended far beyond simple fear of punishment or hope for reward. Immediately below the pharaoh in the social hierarchy stood the vizier, whose position as chief administrator made him the most powerful mortal in the kingdom. The vizier's responsibilities encompassed virtually every aspect of governmental activity, from overseeing tax collection and judicial proceedings to coordinating military campaigns and supervising major construction projects. This concentration of authority in a single office reflected the Old Kingdom's emphasis on centralized administration, while providing the pharaoh with a trusted deputy capable of implementing royal policies across the kingdom's vast territories. The vizier's appointment remained entirely at royal discretion, with incumbents serving at pharaonic pleasure and subject to immediate dismissal for any failure to maintain absolute loyalty. The vizier's daily routine, preserved in administrative texts from the 5th and 6th dynasties, reveals the extraordinary scope of responsibilities that characterized this crucial position. Each morning began with a formal audience where the vizier received reports from department heads responsible for taxation, justice, public works, and military affairs. These reports, submitted in standardized formats that facilitated rapid review, provided comprehensive information about conditions throughout the kingdom, while identifying issues requiring immediate attention. The vizier's responses to these reports, recorded by scribal assistants and distributed to appropriate officials, created a paper trail that enabled systematic monitoring of governmental performance while ensuring accountability for policy implementation. The vizier's judicial responsibilities required expertise in Egyptian law that combined knowledge of traditional customs with understanding of royal decrees that modified or superseded local practices. Major legal cases, particularly those involving property disputes between temples or conflicts between nome administrators, required vizierial intervention to ensure consistent application of royal policy. The vizier's court, located within the royal palace complex at Memphis, served as the kingdom's supreme judicial authority, with decisions carrying the full weight of pharaonic approval. Appeals to the vizier's court followed established procedures that balanced access to justice with protection against frivolous litigation that might overwhelm the governmental apparatus. Beneath the vizier, the Old Kingdom's administrative structure divided into specialized departments that reflected the complex requirements of governing a large territorial state with diverse economic and social systems. The Treasury, headed by a chancellor who ranked among the kingdom's most senior officials, assumed responsibility for collecting taxes, managing royal resources, and funding governmental operations. The Treasury's organization revealed sophisticated understanding of fiscal management that enabled long-term planning for major projects while maintaining sufficient reserves to address emergencies and seasonal variations in revenue. Tax collection procedures standardized throughout the kingdom employed assessment methods based on agricultural productivity, craft production, and commercial activity that created equitable systems while maximizing governmental income. The Department of Public Works coordinated the massive infrastructure projects that characterized Old Kingdom civilization, from pyramid construction and temple building to irrigation system maintenance and road construction. This department's responsibilities required expertise in engineering, logistics, and project management that combined technical knowledge with administrative skills. The coordination of materials, workforce, and transportation for major construction projects demanded systematic planning that extended years into the future while maintaining flexibility to address unexpected challenges or changing priorities. The department's records reveal sophisticated approaches to resource allocation that optimized efficiency while ensuring quality standards appropriate for royal projects. The Department of Agriculture supervised the complex systems of land management, irrigation, and crop production that provided the economic foundation for Old Kingdom prosperity. This department's officials maintained detailed records of land ownership, cultivation patterns, and harvest yields that enabled central planners to optimize agricultural productivity while ensuring adequate food supplies for the kingdom's growing population. The coordination required for successful Nile flood management involved thousands of workers throughout the kingdom, with timing and resource allocation decisions made months in advance based on careful observation of river conditions and weather patterns. The nome system, refined continuously throughout the Old Kingdom period, provided the administrative framework that connected central government with local populations while maintaining royal control over regional resources and activities. Each nome's administration replicated the departmental structure of the central government on a smaller scale, with local officials responsible for taxation, justice, public works, and agricultural management within their territories. The nomarch, appointed by and answerable to the pharaoh, served as the royal representative while maintaining detailed knowledge of local conditions and customs that informed policy implementation. Nome administration required delicate balance between central authority and local autonomy that reflected the practical challenges of governing diverse regions with different economic systems, cultural traditions, and geographic conditions. Nomarchs needed sufficient authority to address local issues effectively while remaining subordinate to Memphis-based officials who coordinated kingdom-wide policies. The selection of nomarchs reflected royal attention to both administrative competence and political loyalty, with appointments often going to individuals whose family backgrounds and personal connections ensured reliable service to pharaonic interests. The social structure beneath the administrative elite reflected Egypt's agricultural economy while accommodating the specialized crafts and commercial activities that supported royal projects and international trade. The scribal class, whose literacy skills made them indispensable for governmental and religious functions, occupied positions of considerable prestige and economic security despite their non-noble origins. Scribal schools, established in major administrative centres throughout the kingdom, provided education that combined technical training in writing and mathematics with instruction in law, religion, and governmental procedures. Graduates of these schools found employment in nome administrations, temple bureaucracies, and royal workshops where their skills commanded respect and provided opportunities for social advancement. The craftsmen responsible for producing the luxury goods and architectural elements that characterized Old Kingdom material culture formed specialized guilds that maintained technical standards while protecting trade secrets and economic interests. Master craftsmen working on royal projects enjoyed high social status and economic privileges that reflected the value placed on their expertise, while apprentice systems ensured the transmission of technical knowledge across generations. The concentration of skilled craftsmen in Memphis and other major centres created communities of specialists whose interactions fostered innovation while maintaining the quality standards required for royal commissions. The agricultural population, comprising the vast majority of Egyptian society, lived within village communities that maintained traditional social structures while adapting to the administrative requirements of the centralized state. Farmers worked land owned by the pharaoh, temples, or noble estates according to complex arrangements that balanced individual subsistence needs with obligations to provide surplus production for taxation and redistribution. Village headmen, selected from local families with traditional authority, served as intermediaries between agricultural communities and nome administrators, while maintaining responsibility for organizing collective labor projects and resolving local disputes. The legal system that governed Old Kingdom society reflected the divine kingship ideology, while incorporating traditional customs and practical considerations that addressed the diverse needs of a complex territorial state. Egyptian law recognized distinct categories of legal status that determined individual rights and responsibilities, with free citizens enjoying protection under royal law, while slaves and servants remained subject to their master's authority. Property rights, carefully defined and systematically enforced, provided security for agricultural and commercial activities while ensuring royal prerogatives over strategic resources and major commercial enterprises. Marriage practices among the Egyptian elite reflected both social conventions and economic considerations that reinforced existing hierarchies while providing mechanisms for limited social mobility. Noble families arranged marriages that consolidated wealth and political influence while ensuring proper religious observances and maintaining bloodline purity, considered essential for certain religious and administrative positions. Royal marriages, governed by complex theological requirements, often involved unions between close relatives that preserved divine bloodlines, while creating political alliances between different branches of the royal family. Family structures throughout Egyptian society emphasized patriarchal authority, while providing women with legal rights and economic opportunities that exceeded those available in many contemporary civilizations. Women could own property, engage in commercial activities, and initiate legal proceedings in their own right, while royal and noble women sometimes wielded considerable political influence through their relationships with male relatives in positions of authority. The economic roles available to women included textile production, food processing, and religious activities that provided income and social status independent of male family members. The economic foundation of Old Kingdom society rested upon sophisticated systems of agricultural production that maximized the Nile Valley's natural advantages while supporting population levels unprecedented in the ancient world. The annual flood cycle, carefully monitored and managed through extensive irrigation systems, provided the water and fertile soil necessary for intensive cultivation of wheat, barley, and other staple crops. Agricultural techniques, refined through centuries of experimentation, achieved yields that supported not only the farming population, but also the substantial non-agricultural workforce required for governmental administration, military service, and specialized craft production. Trade networks extending throughout the ancient Near East and into sub-Saharan Africa provided access to exotic materials and luxury goods that enhanced royal prestige while supplying raw materials for Egyptian craft production. Commercial expeditions, organized under royal sponsorship and protection, established trading relationships that brought cedar wood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold from Nubia, and ivory from Central Africa. These trade relationships required diplomatic arrangements that positioned Egypt as a major regional power, while creating economic dependencies that enhanced pharaonic influence throughout the ancient world. The redistribution system centered on royal and temple estates provided mechanisms for allocating resources throughout Egyptian society, while maintaining the hierarchical relationships that characterized Old Kingdom's social structure. Royal estates, managed by appointed administrators and worked by dependent labourers, produced agricultural surpluses that supported governmental activities while providing reserves for emergency distribution during years of poor harvests. Temple estates endowed by royal grants and managed by priestly bureaucracies combined religious functions with economic activities that supported temple personnel while contributing to the broader redistributive network. The sophisticated administrative apparatus that governed Old Kingdom society operated within a religious framework that permeated every aspect of Egyptian civilization, from the cosmic responsibilities of divine kingship to the daily rituals performed by ordinary citizens seeking divine protection. The theological system that emerged during this period represented a revolutionary synthesis of ancient Egyptian religious traditions with the innovative concepts required to justify and maintain pharaonic authority over an increasingly complex territorial state. This religious evolution paralleled the administrative and architectural developments that characterized the Old Kingdom, creating unified ideological foundations that supported the unprecedented social and political achievements of the period. The elevation of Ra, the sun god of Heliopolis, to supreme position within the Egyptian pantheon reflected both theological sophistication and political calculation that demonstrated the Old Kingdom's systematic approach to religious organization. Ra's identification with the daily solar cycle provided a cosmic framework that explained the pharaoh's divine authority through natural phenomena observable throughout the kingdom, while the god's association with creation myths positioned royal power within universal narratives that transcended local traditions and regional variations. The theological elaboration of Ra's characteristics during the 4th and 5th dynasties created a comprehensive religious system that integrated solar worship with traditional Egyptian deities through complex mythological relationships that satisfied both intellectual requirements and popular religious sensibilities. The Heliopolitan cosmogony, centered on Ra's role as creator deity, provided theological justification for pharaonic authority that extended beyond simple political convenience to encompass sophisticated philosophical concepts about the nature of divine power and cosmic order. According to this creation myth, Ra emerged from the primordial waters of Nun through an act of self-generation that established the fundamental principles governing universal existence. The god's subsequent creation of other deities through various means, speaking them into existence, spitting them forth, or generating them through intimate union, created a divine hierarchy that paralleled and justified the social stratification of Egyptian society. The pharaoh's identification as Ra's earthly representative positioned royal authority within this cosmic framework, making opposition to pharaonic rule equivalent to rebellion against the fundamental order of creation. The integration of solar theology with traditional Egyptian religious practices required sophisticated theological work that balanced innovation with respect for ancient traditions that commanded popular loyalty throughout the kingdom. The priests of Heliopolis, working under royal patronage and protection, developed complex mythological narratives that incorporated local deities into the solar system without eliminating their individual characteristics or regional significance. Ptah of Memphis, for example, was identified as Ra's creative aspect, while Thoth of Hermopolis became the solar god's scribe and messenger. These theological syntheses maintained local religious traditions while establishing Ra's supremacy, creating unified religious systems that supported political centralization without alienating regional populations attached to traditional deities. The development of solar bark mythology during the 5th dynasty provided detailed theological explanations for the pharaoh's post-mortem existence that reflected sophisticated astronomical observation combined with complex religious symbolism. According to these beliefs, Ra travelled across the sky each day in a solar boat, accompanied by various deities who protected the sun god from the forces of chaos that threatened cosmic order. During the night, Ra's bark descended into the underworld, where the god battled the serpent Apophis and other enemies of creation before emerging victorious at dawn to begin another daily cycle. The pharaoh's identification with Ra enabled royal participation in this cosmic drama, ensuring the king's continued divine functions after death, while providing theological justification for the elaborate mortuary preparations required to facilitate royal afterlife. The astronomical precision required for solar theology encouraged systematic observation of celestial phenomena that advanced Egyptian mathematical and scientific knowledge, while providing practical tools for religious and administrative activities. Temple astronomers, working under royal sponsorship, developed sophisticated methods for tracking solar movements, lunar cycles, and stellar positions that enabled accurate calendar systems and precise architectural orientation for religious buildings. The alignment of pyramid complexes with cardinal directions and specific stars reflected this astronomical expertise, while demonstrating the integration of scientific knowledge with religious symbolism that characterized Old Kingdom intellectual achievements. The mortuary beliefs that evolved during the Old Kingdom represented a fundamental transformation in Egyptian concepts of death and afterlife that reflected the theological implications of divine kingship ideology. Traditional Egyptian burial practices had emphasized the preservation of the deceased's physical form and the provision of material goods necessary for continued existence in a realm that closely resembled earthly life. The divine status of Old Kingdom pharaohs required more sophisticated theological frameworks that addressed the unique challenges of maintaining divine functions beyond physical death, while ensuring the continued cosmic responsibilities that justified royal authority among the living. The development of mummification techniques during the Old Kingdom reflected both practical requirements for preserving royal remains and theological concepts about the relationship between physical and spiritual aspects of human existence. The elaborate procedures employed in royal mummification combined empirical knowledge of human anatomy with religious beliefs about the multiple components of individual identity that survived physical death. The removal of internal organs, their separate preservation in canopic jars protected by specific deities, and the treatment of the body with natron salts and aromatic resins created preserved remains that could serve as permanent vessels for the pharaoh's spiritual essence, while maintaining the physical integrity considered necessary for afterlife existence. The theological sophistication underlying mummification practices revealed detailed understanding of human anatomy that advanced medical knowledge while serving religious purposes. The careful removal of the brain through the nasal cavity, the precise extraction of abdominal organs without damaging the body's exterior appearance, and the treatment of tissues with preservative substances demonstrated surgical skills that required extensive training and experience. The priests responsible for mummification procedures underwent lengthy apprenticeships that combined technical instruction with religious education, creating specialized professional classes whose expertise served both practical and theological functions. The evolution of canopic jar traditions during the Old Kingdom reflected the integration of anatomical knowledge with complex religious symbolism that protected specific organs while maintaining their availability for afterlife functions. The four sons of Horus, Imseti, Duamutef, Hapi, and Kebesenuef assumed a responsibility for protecting the liver, stomach, lungs, and intestines respectively, while their association with cardinal directions created cosmic frameworks that positioned preserved organs within universal spatial relationships. The artistic programs decorating canopic jars employed the same canonical, proportional systems developed for royal sculpture, creating unified aesthetic approaches that reinforced religious messages while demonstrating the integration of artistic and theological concerns. The concept of the afterlife journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, provided comprehensive theological frameworks for understanding post-mortem existence that addressed both royal and non-royal concerns, while maintaining appropriate distinctions between divine and mortal afterlife experiences. The Duat was conceived as a complex landscape containing rivers, lakes, fields, and cities that paralleled earthly geography, while incorporating supernatural elements that reflected the transformed nature of post-mortem existence. The deceased's navigation through this landscape required extensive preparation, including knowledge of proper spells, possession of appropriate equipment, and completion of ritual procedures that ensured safe passage through dangerous regions populated by hostile deities and supernatural creatures. The royal afterlife journey incorporated additional elements that reflected pharaonic divine status, while ensuring the king's continued cosmic responsibilities. The pharaoh's identification with Ra enabled royal participation in the daily solar cycle, with the deceased king accompanying the sun god through the underworld during nighttime hours before emerging triumphant at dawn to begin another day of divine activity. This theological framework maintained royal authority beyond physical death while providing cosmic justification for the elaborate mortuary preparations required to facilitate pharaonic afterlife functions. The pyramid texts, inscribed in the burial chambers of 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids, represented the earliest known religious literature and provided detailed insights into Old Kingdom theological concepts and funerary rituals. These texts, comprising over 700 individual spells and incantations, covered every aspect of royal afterlife preparation, from the initial moments following death through the complex procedures required for successful transition to divine existence. The spells addressed practical concerns such as the preservation of the royal body, the provision of food and drink for afterlife sustenance, and the protection of the deceased from supernatural dangers, while also incorporating sophisticated theological concepts about the nature of divine existence and cosmic order. The literary quality of the pyramid texts revealed sophisticated approaches to religious composition that combined practical instruction with poetic expression designed to enhance the text's spiritual effectiveness. Individual spells employed complex metaphorical language, elaborate wordplay, and intricate rhythmic patterns that created literary works of considerable artistic merit while serving essential religious functions. The text organization reflected systematic theological thinking that arranged related spells in logical sequences while maintaining flexibility for adaptation to specific royal burial requirements. The theological concepts preserved in the pyramid texts provided comprehensive information about Old Kingdom religious beliefs that extended far beyond mortuary concerns to encompass creation mythology, divine relationships, and cosmic principles governing universal existence. The text's references to ancient religious traditions reveal the continuity of Egyptian theological development while documenting innovations that reflected changing political and social conditions. The integration of solar theology with traditional religious concepts demonstrated the sophisticated intellectual work required to maintain religious coherence while adapting to new political requirements. The establishment of mortuary cults for deceased pharaohs created permanent religious institutions that maintained ongoing ritual activities while providing economic and social structures that influenced Egyptian society for centuries. These cults, endowed with agricultural estates and staffed by hereditary priests, performed daily offerings, seasonal festivals, and special ceremonies that ensured the continued divine functions of deceased rulers while providing employment for substantial numbers of religious personnel. The economic resources devoted to mortuary cults represented significant proportions of royal wealth, with some pyramid complexes receiving endowments that included entire villages and their agricultural production. The social organization of mortuary cults reflected the hierarchical principles that characterized Old Kingdom society, while creating new categories of religious professionals whose status derived from their service to deceased pharaohs. High priests responsible for overseeing cult activities ranked among the kingdom's most prestigious religious officials, while specialized priests performed specific ritual functions that required extensive training and maintained strict purity requirements. The hereditary transmission of priestly positions created religious dynasties that maintained cult activities across multiple generations while accumulating wealth and influence that extended beyond purely religious concerns. The economic importance of mortuary cults extended throughout Egyptian society through the employment opportunities and commercial activities generated by ongoing ritual requirements. The daily presentation of food offerings required continuous supplies of bread, beer, meat, and other provisions that supported agricultural producers, food processors, and transportation networks throughout the regions surrounding major pyramid complexes. The maintenance of cult buildings and equipment provided work for craftsmen, while the textile requirements for priestly garments and ritual equipment supported weaving industries. The cumulative economic impact of mortuary cults created substantial segments of Egyptian economy devoted to serving the religious needs of deceased pharaohs. The expansion of mortuary cult principles to non-royal burials during the later Old Kingdom reflected the democratization of religious concepts, originally reserved for pharaonic use, while maintaining appropriate distinctions between royal and private afterlife preparations. Wealthy nobles constructed elaborate mastaba tombs, equipped with offering chapels where family members and hired priests could perform simplified versions of royal mortuary rituals. These private mortuary cults, while lacking the resources and theological sophistication of royal establishments, provided models for afterlife preparation that extended sophisticated religious concepts throughout Egyptian elite society. The artistic programs decorating private tomb chapels reveal the adaptation of royal iconographic systems to non-royal contexts while maintaining respect for the theological distinctions that separated divine and mortal afterlife experiences. Relief carvings and painted scenes depicted daily life activities, agricultural scenes, and craft production that would continue in the afterlife, while carefully avoiding royal prerogatives and divine attributes reserved for pharaonic use. These decorative programs provided detailed information about Old Kingdom social and economic life, while demonstrating the influence of royal artistic standards on private artistic production. The transition from the 4th to the 5th dynasty around 2494 BC marked a fundamental shift in the ideological foundations of Egyptian kingship that would reshape the political, religious, and economic structures of the Old Kingdom. The accession of Userkaf, the first pharaoh of the new dynasty, brought to power a ruler whose legitimacy rested not on direct descent from the pyramid builders of Giza, but on his claimed relationship to Ra, the sun god of Heliopolis. This theological reorientation represented more than dynastic change. It signalled a revolutionary transformation in royal ideology that would elevate solar religion to unprecedented prominence while fundamentally altering the relationship between pharaonic authority and religious institutions. The Westcar Papyrus, though composed much later, preserves tradition suggesting that the first 3 5th dynasty pharaohs were born of a divine union between Ra and the wife of a priest of Ra at Heliopolis. While these stories clearly represent mythological rather than historical accounts, they reflect the dynasty's deliberate emphasis on solar connections that distinguish 5th dynasty kingship from the architectural monumentalism that had characterized their 4th dynasty predecessors. This shift from pyramid-centered to sun-centered royal ideology required extensive theological innovation that would fundamentally reshape Egyptian religious practice while creating new forms of royal architectural expression. The construction of solar temples alongside traditional pyramid complexes represented the most visible manifestation of this ideological transformation. Yusukaf's solar temple at Abu Ghurab, the first of 6 such monuments built during the 5th dynasty, established architectural precedents that combined traditional Egyptian building techniques with innovative design elements specifically adapted to solar worship requirements. The temple's central feature was a massive stone obelisk rising over 100 feet above a rectangular base, creating a symbolic representation of the primordial mound from which Ra first emerged at creation. This obelisk, constructed of limestone blocks fitted with the same precision employed in pyramid construction, was positioned within a rectangular courtyard surrounded by covered corridors that provided space for the complex ritual activities required by solar worship. The solar temple complex included specialized architectural features designed to accommodate the unique requirements of sun worship that had no precedent in earlier Egyptian religious architecture. A large alabaster altar positioned before the obelisk provided a platform for the presentation of offerings to Ra during the daily solar ceremonies that formed the core of temple ritual activity. The altar's surface, carved with drainage channels and collection basins, facilitated the proper disposal of liquid offerings while maintaining the ritual purity required for effective solar worship. Surrounding the altar, a series of offering tables carved from single blocks of granite provided additional surfaces for the presentation of food, drink and incense offerings that accompanied the complex liturgical programs performed throughout each day. The temple's orientation reflected sophisticated astronomical knowledge that enabled precise alignment with solar phenomena while incorporating mathematical relationships that enhanced the monument's symbolic effectiveness. The main axis of the complex aligned with the cardinal directions, while secondary alignments incorporated relationships to specific stars and seasonal solar positions that created cosmic connections extending throughout the annual calendar. The temple's entrance faced east, allowing the first rays of the rising sun to illuminate the obelisk's apex each dawn, while the internal arrangement of courtyards and corridors created sightlines that tracked the sun's daily movement across the sky. The economic implications of solar temple construction revealed the substantial resources that 5th dynasty pharaohs devoted to religious activities while maintaining traditional pyramid building programs. The simultaneous construction of pyramids and solar temples required unprecedented mobilization of skilled craftsmen, building materials and organizational resources that strained even Egypt's sophisticated administrative apparatus. The solar temples demanded specialized architectural expertise for obelisk construction and astronomical alignment that complemented rather than replaced the engineering skills required for pyramid building. The resulting construction programs represented the most ambitious building activities in Egyptian history, surpassing even the 4th dynasty's achievements in terms of total resource commitment and organizational complexity. The religious personnel required for solar temple operation created new categories of priestly service that expanded the influence of solar theology while providing career opportunities that attracted ambitious young men from throughout the kingdom. The high priest of Ra at each solar temple ranked among Egypt's most prestigious religious officials, with authority over extensive temple estates and responsibility for coordinating complex ritual programs that required daily performance throughout the year. These positions provided pathways to political influence that bypassed traditional administrative hierarchies, creating alternative routes to power that enhanced the priesthood's political significance. The ritual programs performed at solar temples incorporated elements from traditional Egyptian religious practice, while introducing innovations specifically designed to enhance Ra's theological prominence. The daily solar liturgy began before dawn with purification ceremonies that prepared priests for the sacred activities that would accompany the sun's rising. As the first light appeared on the eastern horizon, priests began reciting hymns that praised Ra's victory over the forces of darkness while welcoming the god's return to the world of the living. The presentation of offerings accompanied these hymns, with specific items designated for different times of day according to complex schedules that coordinated earthly ritual activities with celestial phenomena. The theological sophistication underlying solar temple ritual reflected extensive intellectual development that synthesized traditional Egyptian religious concepts with innovative theological frameworks designed to enhance royal divine status. The identification of the pharaoh with Ra during solar ceremonies positioned royal authority within cosmic dramas that transcended earthly political relationships, while the king's role as chief officiant at solar rituals demonstrated divine capabilities that justified absolute political authority. The theological elaboration of solar mythology during this period created comprehensive religious systems that integrated creation stories, afterlife beliefs, and ethical concepts into unified frameworks that supported both religious and political objectives. The rise of the Heliopolitan priesthood to positions of unprecedented political influence represented one of the most significant developments of the 5th dynasty period. The priests of Ra at Heliopolis, whose theological expertise had been essential for developing solar religious systems, leveraged their religious authority into political power that enabled direct influence over royal policy decisions. The high priest of Ra at Heliopolis assumed responsibilities that extended far beyond traditional religious functions to encompass advisory roles in governmental administration, military planning, and diplomatic relations. This expansion of priestly authority created new power centers that competed with traditional administrative hierarchies while introducing religious considerations into political decision-making processes. The economic resources controlled by Heliopolitan priests reflected their growing political influence, while providing material foundations for continued expansion of solar religious activities. Royal grants of agricultural estates to solar temples created substantial economic bases that supported not only ritual activities, but also extensive construction programs, craft production, and commercial enterprises that enhanced priestly wealth and influence. The temple estates operated sophisticated agricultural systems that employed thousands of workers while producing surpluses that funded temple activities and provided resources for political activities that advanced priestly interests. The integration of solar theology with traditional Egyptian administrative practices required careful balancing of innovation with respect for established customs that commanded loyalty throughout the kingdom's administrative apparatus. The nome system, refined during the 4th dynasty to provide effective central control over regional administration, required adaptation to accommodate the enhanced role of religious considerations in governmental decision-making. Nomarchs found themselves responsible not only for traditional administrative functions, but also for ensuring proper religious observances within their territories, while temple priests received enhanced authority over local religious activities that affected agricultural productivity and social stability. The gradual decentralization of political authority that characterized the 5th dynasty reflected both deliberate policy decisions and unintended consequences of the dynasty's religious innovations. The enhanced role of religious institutions in governmental activities created alternative power centers that competed with traditional administrative hierarchies, while the resources devoted to solar temple construction reduced the economic foundations that had supported 4th Dynasty centralization. The simultaneous demands of pyramid construction, solar temple building, and ongoing governmental operations strained Egypt's administrative capabilities while creating opportunities for regional officials to assume greater autonomy over local affairs. The emergence of hereditary control over nome administration represented a fundamental departure from 4th Dynasty practices that had maintained strict royal control over regional appointments. The increasing complexity of governmental responsibilities, combined with the specialized knowledge required for effective administration, encouraged the development of administrative families whose expertise in local conditions made them indispensable for effective regional governance. Nomarchs who had originally served at royal pleasure gradually established hereditary claims to their positions, while their families accumulated wealth and local influence that enhanced their political autonomy. The architectural evidence for this administrative decentralization appeared in the increasingly elaborate mastaba tombs constructed by provincial officials during the later 5th Dynasty. These monuments, while maintaining appropriate distinctions from royal pyramid complexes, achieved unprecedented scale and sophistication that reflected the growing wealth and status of regional administrators. The relief programs decorating these tombs depicted extensive estates, numerous servants, and elaborate possessions that demonstrated economic resources previously concentrated in royal hands, while the tomb's architectural sophistication revealed access to skilled craftsmen and expensive materials that indicated substantial local autonomy. The economic challenges facing the monarchy during the 5th Dynasty stemmed from the cumulative costs of maintaining multiple pyramid complexes, solar temples, and their associated mortuary cults, while supporting an expanded governmental apparatus and enhanced religious establishment. Each royal mortuary complex required permanent endowments that provided ongoing support for priestly personnel, ritual activities, and building maintenance that continued indefinitely after the pharaoh's death. The multiplication of these permanent obligations during the 5th Dynasty created substantial drains on royal resources that reduced the economic foundations available for new construction projects and governmental activities. The mortuary cult of Khufu alone required resources equivalent to entire nome administrations, with daily offerings that consumed substantial agricultural production while supporting hundreds of priests, servants, and administrative personnel. The addition of similar obligations for subsequent 4th Dynasty pharaohs, combined with the new requirements created by solar temple endowments, created cumulative economic burdens that exceeded even Egypt's substantial productive capabilities. The resulting financial pressures forced difficult choices between maintaining existing religious obligations and funding new construction projects that demonstrated continued royal power and divine status. The administrative complexity required for coordinating multiple mortuary cults, solar temples, and traditional governmental functions strained Egyptian bureaucratic capabilities, while creating opportunities for administrative officials to assume enhanced autonomy over resource allocation and policy implementation. The detailed record-keeping required for managing complex endowments and ritual schedules demanded specialized expertise that concentrated knowledge and authority in the hands of administrative specialists whose competence made them increasingly indispensable for effective governmental operation. These officials gradually assumed decision-making authority that had previously been reserved for direct royal control, while their specialized knowledge created barriers to royal oversight that enhanced bureaucratic independence. The transformation of Egyptian religious practice during the 5th Dynasty extended beyond royal and elite circles to encompass changes in popular religious observance that reflected the broader influence of solar theology on Egyptian society. Local temples throughout the kingdom incorporated solar elements into their traditional religious programs, while regional festivals began to emphasize connections to Ra and solar mythology that enhanced theological coherence while maintaining local religious traditions. The democratization of solar religious concepts created new forms of popular religious expression that strengthened social cohesion while providing additional mechanisms for royal ideological influence. The artistic innovations accompanying 5th Dynasty religious developments created new forms of architectural decoration and sculptural representation that reflected the enhanced role of solar symbolism in Egyptian visual culture. Relief programs in solar temples employed iconographic systems that combined traditional Egyptian artistic conventions with innovative symbolic elements specifically designed to communicate solar theological concepts. The representation of solar barks, obelisks, and solar discs required artistic solutions that translated complex religious ideas into visual forms accessible to both literate and illiterate audiences, while maintaining the aesthetic standards established during the 4th Dynasty. The international implications of 5th Dynasty religious innovations extended Egyptian cultural influence throughout the ancient Near East, while creating diplomatic opportunities that enhanced Egypt's regional political position. The theological sophistication of solar religious systems attracted attention from foreign courts whose own religious traditions incorporated solar elements, while Egyptian expertise in solar temple construction and astronomical observation provided valuable diplomatic gifts that strengthened international relationships. The export of Egyptian religious concepts, artistic styles, and architectural techniques created cultural dependencies that enhanced Egypt's soft power while providing economic opportunities for Egyptian craftsmen and religious specialists. The succession of Teti to the throne around 2345 BC marked the beginning of the 6th Dynasty and initiated a period characterized by extraordinarily long reigns that would test the limits of Egyptian administrative capacity while revealing fundamental weaknesses in the centralized system that had sustained Old Kingdom power for over 3 centuries. Teti's accession followed a period of political instability that had ended the 5th Dynasty, with circumstances surrounding the transition suggesting internal conflicts that may have involved the assassination of his predecessor, Unas. The new pharaoh's efforts to restore royal authority required careful balancing of competing interests among the provincial nobility, religious establishments, and administrative bureaucracy that had accumulated substantial autonomy during the 5th Dynasty's gradual decentralization. The challenge of maintaining effective central control over extended periods became particularly acute during the reign of Pepi I, who ruled for approximately 50 years beginning around 2321 BC. The unprecedented length of this reign created administrative problems that had never before confronted Egyptian government, as officials appointed early in the king's rule aged and died while their successors inherited positions that had become increasingly hereditary rather than subject to royal appointment. The bureaucratic apparatus that had functioned effectively under shorter reigns struggled to maintain responsiveness to royal directives when the same individuals occupied key positions for decades, developing personal interests and local loyalties that gradually superseded their obligations to central authority. Pepi I's attempts to address these administrative challenges involved frequent reorganizations of governmental departments and regular transfers of officials between different positions and regions. The king's correspondence with provincial governors, preserved in later copies, reveals the growing difficulties involved in coordinating kingdom-wide policies when regional administrators possessed detailed local knowledge that exceeded central government understanding of provincial conditions. The pharaoh's directives increasingly took the form of general guidelines rather than specific instructions, reflecting the practical impossibility of micromanaging local affairs from Memphis when communication delays and geographic distances prevented timely royal responses to rapidly changing circumstances. The economic pressures created by maintaining extensive royal establishments over extended periods forced fundamental changes in resource allocation that weakened traditional mechanisms of royal control. The costs associated with supporting large royal households, extensive court establishments and elaborate ceremonial programs consumed increasing proportions of royal revenues while providing fewer tangible benefits in terms of political control or economic productivity. The multiplication of royal wives, concubines, and offspring during long reigns created extensive networks of royal relatives whose maintenance required substantial resources, while their competing claims to succession created potential sources of political instability. The administrative burden of managing complex succession arrangements became particularly problematic when Pepi I designated multiple sons as potential heirs while maintaining uncertainty about the actual succession until late in his reign. The preparation of these princes for possible royal responsibilities required extensive education, establishment of separate households, and provision of appropriate positions within the governmental hierarchy that created parallel power structures competing for resources and influence. The resulting political tensions affected governmental efficiency, while creating opportunities for ambitious officials to advance their interests through careful manipulation of royal family dynamics. The reign of Pepi II, beginning around 2278 BC and extending for what ancient sources claim was 94 years, represents the extreme case of the administrative challenges created by exceptionally long royal tenure. Modern scholars debate the accuracy of this traditional figure, with some suggesting that the recorded reign length may reflect confusion between different rulers bearing similar names or the artificial extension of regnal years for ideological purposes. However, even conservative estimates suggest a reign of at least 60 years, making Pepi II one of the longest ruling monarchs in recorded history and creating unprecedented challenges for maintaining effective governmental control across such an extended period. The practical impossibility of maintaining personal royal control over governmental activities during such an extended reign necessitated increasing delegation of authority to administrative officials whose accumulated experience and local knowledge made them indispensable for effective policy implementation. The viziers who served under Pepi II gradually assumed decision-making responsibilities that had previously been reserved for direct royal control, while their long tenure in office enabled them to develop personal relationships and political networks that enhanced their autonomy. The resulting administrative system functioned more as a confederation of semi-autonomous departments than as a unified governmental hierarchy responsive to central direction. The provincial administration during Pepi II's reign underwent fundamental transformation, as nomarchs established hereditary control over their territories while accumulating resources and authority that enabled increasingly independent action. The practical difficulties of maintaining effective royal oversight over distant provinces during an extended reign created opportunities for regional officials to develop local power bases that gradually superseded their dependence on central government support. Archaeological evidence from provincial sites reveals the construction of elaborate administrative complexes and private monuments that demonstrate the growing wealth and autonomy of regional governors during this period. The military expeditions launched during the 6th dynasty represented attempts to maintain Egyptian influence in Nubia and the Levant, while providing outlets for the kingdom's military capabilities and sources of exotic resources that enhanced royal prestige. However, the organisation of these campaigns increasingly depended on provincial governors who commanded local military forces and possessed the logistical capabilities necessary for extended operations in distant territories. The most famous of these expeditions, led by Weni under Pepi I and later by Harkuf under Pepi II, reveal the growing role of provincial officials in conducting foreign policy while demonstrating the continued Egyptian interest in maintaining commercial and political relationships beyond the kingdom's traditional borders. Weni's autobiographical inscription, carved in his tomb at Abydos, provides detailed information about military campaigns against Asiatic peoples in the Sinai Peninsula and southern Palestine that required coordination of forces drawn from throughout Egypt. The expedition's organisation involved known governors who contributed troops according to quotas established by central planning, while the campaign's logistics required coordination with local officials responsible for supplying provisions and transportation. Rennie's account emphasises his personal role in coordinating these diverse elements while maintaining royal authority over the expedition's conduct. But the practical requirements of the campaign necessitated substantial delegation of authority to regional commanders whose local knowledge proved essential for successful operations. The economic motivations underlying these military expeditions reflected Egypt's continuing need for exotic materials and luxury goods that enhanced royal prestige while providing raw materials for craft production and religious activities. The Sinai campaigns aimed primarily at securing access to copper mines and turquoise deposits that supplied essential materials for Egyptian metalworking and jewellery production, while also demonstrating Egyptian military capability to potential rivals in the region. The revenues generated by these expeditions, including tribute payments and commercial privileges, provided resources that supported royal activities while creating economic incentives for continued military involvement in foreign territories. Harkuf's trading expeditions to Nubia during Pepi II's reign revealed the sophisticated commercial networks that connected Egypt with sub-Saharan Africa, while demonstrating the growing autonomy of provincial officials in conducting international relations. Harkuf, who served as governor of the southernmost nome and possessed extensive knowledge of Nubian geography and political conditions, organised multiple expeditions that brought back exotic goods, including ivory, ebony, incense, and live animals that enhanced royal prestige while providing valuable trade commodities. His correspondence with the young Pepi II, preserved in his tomb inscriptions, reveals the pharaoh's personal interest in these expeditions, while demonstrating the practical dependence on provincial expertise for successful foreign operations. The political relationships established with Nubian rulers during these expeditions created tributary arrangements that enhanced Egyptian influence while providing models for indirect control that would influence later imperial policies. Rather than establishing direct administrative control over Nubian territories, Egyptian officials negotiated agreements with local rulers who maintained internal autonomy while accepting Egyptian suzerainty and providing regular tribute payments. These arrangements required careful diplomatic management that balanced Egyptian interests with Nubian autonomy while maintaining military capabilities sufficient to enforce compliance when necessary. The gradual weakening of royal authority during the later Sixth Dynasty reflected both the cumulative effects of extended reigns and fundamental changes in Egyptian society that undermined traditional mechanisms of central control. The hereditary transmission of administrative positions created entrenched bureaucratic families whose local interests increasingly diverged from royal priorities, while the economic resources required to maintain extensive royal establishments reduced the material incentives available for ensuring official loyalty. The multiplication of royal mortuary cults and religious endowments created permanent drains on governmental resources that limited the pharaoh's ability to reward supporters or punish opponents through economic means. The provincial nobility that emerged during this period possessed economic resources, military capabilities, and local authority that enabled increasingly independent action, while maintaining formal recognition of pharaonic supremacy. The elaborate tombs constructed by these officials demonstrate wealth that rivaled royal resources, while their inscriptions reveal administrative responsibilities and territorial control that approached sovereign authority within their regions. The artistic programs decorating these tombs employed iconographic systems previously reserved for royal use, while their architectural sophistication required access to skilled craftsmen and expensive materials that indicated substantial economic autonomy. The cultural and artistic developments of the late Old Kingdom reflected both the continued vitality of Egyptian civilization and the changing social conditions that characterized the period's political transformation. The relief carving techniques developed during this period achieved unprecedented refinement through innovations that enhanced both artistic sophistication and production efficiency. The masters working on provincial tomb decoration developed methods for creating high-quality relief programs that combined traditional iconographic systems with local variations that reflected regional preferences and cultural traditions. The technical innovations in relief carving included improved tools and techniques that enabled more precise stone cutting while reducing the time required for decorative programs. Copper chisels with improved metallurgy provided sharper cutting edges that maintained their effectiveness longer, while wooden mallets with optimized weight distribution reduced craftsman fatigue during extended carving sessions. The development of standardized templates and proportional guides enabled consistent quality across different workshops while facilitating training of apprentice craftsmen who could achieve professional standards more rapidly than previous generations. The democratization of burial practices during the 6th dynasty represented a fundamental expansion of mortuary privileges previously reserved for royal and high elite use. Provincial officials and wealthy merchants gained access to mummification techniques, elaborate tomb decoration, and mortuary cult establishment that had formerly been restricted to the highest levels of Egyptian society. This expansion reflected both the growing wealth of non-royal elites and the weakening of royal control over religious practices that had traditionally reinforced social hierarchies through exclusive access to sophisticated afterlife preparation. The spread of pyramid text spells to private tombs marked a particularly significant development in the democratization of religious privileges. These sacred texts, originally inscribed only in royal burial chambers, began appearing in modified forms in the tombs of high officials who possessed sufficient resources and religious authority to commission such elaborate mortuary preparations. The adaptation of royal religious formulas to non-royal contexts required careful theological work that maintained appropriate distinctions between divine and mortal afterlife experiences while providing enhanced spiritual protection for wealthy private individuals. The artistic programs in private tombs achieved unprecedented sophistication through the employment of master craftsmen whose skills had been developed through work on royal projects, but who found increasing opportunities in the growing market for elaborate private monuments. The relief carvings in the tomb of Mereruka at Saqqara, dating to the reign of Teti, demonstrate technical excellence that equals contemporary royal work while incorporating innovative compositional elements that enhance narrative clarity and visual impact. The detailed depictions of daily life activities, agricultural scenes, and craft production provided comprehensive records of Egyptian society while creating afterlife environments that would ensure continued prosperity for deceased officials. The economic implications of this artistic democratization created new markets for skilled craftsmen while reducing the concentration of artistic production in royal workshops. Provincial centres developed their own artistic traditions that combined metropolitan standards with local preferences, creating regional variations that enriched Egyptian visual culture while maintaining overall stylistic coherence. The competition between different workshops encouraged innovation, while providing career opportunities that attracted talented individuals from throughout the kingdom to artistic professions. The international relationships maintained during the 6th dynasty revealed both Egypt's continued regional prominence and the growing challenges involved in projecting power beyond the kingdom's traditional borders. Diplomatic correspondence discovered at sites throughout the ancient Near East documents Egyptian involvement in regional politics, while revealing the sophisticated diplomatic protocols that governed international relations during this period. Egyptian pharaohs maintained regular correspondence with rulers in Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Levant while receiving embassies that brought exotic gifts and negotiated commercial agreements. The trade networks that connected Egypt with distant regions required constant diplomatic maintenance that involved complex negotiations over commercial privileges, territorial boundaries and mutual security arrangements. Egyptian merchants operating in foreign territories depended on diplomatic agreements that provided legal protection and commercial privileges, while foreign traders in Egypt required similar arrangements that balanced Egyptian sovereignty with international commercial interests. The administration of these relationships required specialized diplomatic personnel whose expertise in foreign languages, customs, and political conditions made them increasingly valuable for maintaining Egypt's international position. The military innovations and administrative adaptations that had characterized the later Sixth Dynasty proved insufficient to address the unprecedented environmental crisis that began to manifest around 2200 BC. Contemporary records from provincial archives reveal the first indications of what would become a catastrophic shift in Nile flood patterns, with water levels failing to reach the benchmarks that had sustained Egyptian agriculture for over 5 centuries. The Nilometer readings preserved in temple records from Elephantine document a precipitous decline in annual flood heights, with measurements falling consistently below the minimum levels required for successful cultivation across the kingdom's agricultural heartland. The climatic changes affecting Egypt formed part of broader environmental transformation that impacted civilizations throughout the ancient Near East and beyond. Paleoclimatic evidence from ice cores, tree rings, and sediment deposits reveals a significant aridification event that reduced precipitation across North Africa and southwestern Asia, fundamentally altering the atmospheric patterns that had sustained the Nile's annual flood cycle. The monsoon systems that brought moisture from the Indian Ocean to the Ethiopian highlands, where the Blue Nile originates, shifted southward by several degrees of latitude, reducing the rainfall that fed the river system during the critical summer months when floodwaters traditionally reached Egypt. Archaeological evidence from Nubian sites demonstrates the severity of this climatic shift through the abandonment of settlements that had flourished for centuries along the Nile's banks. Excavations at Kerma reveal a dramatic reduction in site occupation around 2200 BC, with archaeological layers indicating rapid abandonment of residential areas and the collapse of local craft production systems. The pottery sequences from these sites show abrupt changes in manufacturing techniques and decorative styles that suggest significant population displacement and cultural disruption. Similar patterns appear at sites throughout the Nile Valley, creating a comprehensive picture of environmental stress that affected the entire river system from its sources in Central Africa to its delta in the Mediterranean. The immediate agricultural consequences of reduced flood levels created cascading effects throughout Egyptian society that overwhelmed the administrative systems designed to manage normal variations in river behavior. The sophisticated irrigation networks that had been optimized for traditional flood patterns proved inadequate when water levels fell below the intake points for major canal systems. Vast areas of previously fertile land in the Delta and Middle Egypt received insufficient water for successful cultivation, while the reduced silt deposition that accompanied lower floods gradually degraded soil fertility in regions that continue to receive adequate irrigation. Provincial records from the 22nd Nome of Upper Egypt document the systematic failure of local irrigation systems as canal networks designed for higher water levels became inoperative when flood peaks fell below critical thresholds. The Nome's agricultural productivity, which had supported substantial populations and contributed significant tax revenues to central government, declined by an estimated 60% within a single generation. Similar records from other regions reveal comparable agricultural collapses that created widespread food shortages and forced large-scale population movements as farmers abandoned unproductive lands in search of regions where cultivation remained viable. The centralized redistribution system that had functioned effectively during periods of normal agricultural production proved catastrophically inadequate when faced with kingdom-wide crop failures and resource scarcities. The royal granaries that had traditionally served as buffers during occasional poor harvests contained insufficient reserves to address prolonged agricultural decline across multiple regions simultaneously. The administrative apparatus responsible for coordinating resource distribution lacked both the logistical capabilities and the transportation infrastructure necessary to move adequate food supplies from the few remaining productive areas to the growing numbers of regions experiencing severe shortages. Memphis, the administrative heart of the Old Kingdom, faced unprecedented challenges as reports arrived from throughout the kingdom documenting crop failures, abandoned settlements, and growing social unrest. The vizier's daily audiences, which had traditionally involved routine administrative matters and minor regional disputes, increasingly focused on crisis management, as provincial governors requested emergency assistance while reporting their inability to meet traditional tax obligations. The governmental apparatus that had evolved to manage prosperity and coordinate massive construction projects found itself overwhelmed by the complex logistics of disaster response and resource allocation during sustained economic contraction. The breakdown of traditional economic relationships became apparent in the archaeological record through changes in material culture that reflect reduced access to luxury goods and specialized craft products. Excavations at sites throughout Egypt reveal dramatic simplifications in pottery styles, with locally produced utilitarian vessels replacing the sophisticated ceramics that had characterized earlier periods. Metal objects become increasingly rare in domestic contexts, suggesting either reduced production or the recycling of existing metal goods to meet basic needs. Jewellery and decorative objects virtually disappear from non-elite burial assemblages, indicating the concentration of remaining wealth among a shrinking number of individuals who retained access to scarce resources. The social tensions created by widespread economic hardship manifested in various forms of civil unrest that challenged traditional mechanisms of social control. Papyrus documents from the later Old Kingdom, though fragmentary and difficult to date precisely, preserve references to years of fighting and periods when the land was in distress. These texts describe social upheavals that involve conflicts between different social groups, attacks on wealthy estates, and the breakdown of traditional authority structures that had maintained order during prosperous periods. The language employed in these documents suggests sustained periods of violence and social chaos that overwhelmed local administrative capabilities. Regional variations in the severity of economic decline created additional political tensions, as areas that retained some agricultural productivity became destinations for refugees from more severely affected regions. The resulting population pressures strained local resources while creating conflicts between established residents and newcomers, competing for limited opportunities. Provincial governors found themselves managing not only agricultural crises within their traditional territories, but also the complex social and economic challenges created by large-scale population movements that disrupted established communities and traditional labour arrangements. The royal building programs that had sustained Egyptian craft production and provided employment for thousands of skilled workers underwent dramatic reductions as resources became increasingly scarce and governmental priorities shifted toward basic survival needs. The pyramid complex of Pepi Sue, which had employed massive workforces during the early decades of his reign, experienced significant reductions in construction activity as royal resources were diverted to emergency food distribution and social stability maintenance. Archaeological evidence from the Saqqara construction sites reveals the abandonment of partially completed projects and the reduction of workforce levels to skeleton crews responsible primarily for maintaining existing structures rather than advancing new construction. The solar temples established during the 5th dynasty faced particular challenges as their elaborate ritual requirements and substantial personnel needs became increasingly difficult to sustain during periods of economic hardship. The daily offering programs that had required continuous supplies of bread, beer, meat, and other provisions could no longer be maintained at traditional levels when agricultural production declined and transportation systems became unreliable. Temple records from this period document the gradual reduction of ritual activities and the dismissal of religious personnel as endowment revenues proved insufficient to support established programs. The artistic production that had flourished during the prosperous periods of the Old Kingdom experienced dramatic contraction as patronage networks collapsed and access to high-quality materials became increasingly restricted. The relief carving workshops that had produced sophisticated decorative programs for royal and private monuments found themselves with reduced commissions as wealthy patrons focused their resources on basic survival needs rather than elaborate artistic projects. The technical standards that had characterized Old Kingdom art began to decline as master craftsmen left the profession or were forced to work with inferior materials and reduced time allocations. Provincial burial practices during this period reveal the democratization of mortuary customs that occurred not through the expansion of elite privileges, but through the general reduction in burial elaboration across all social levels. The elaborate mastaba tombs that had characterized wealthy provincial officials during the prosperous Sixth Dynasty gave way to simpler burial arrangements that reflected reduced economic capabilities while maintaining basic religious requirements for afterlife preparation. Even elite burials show simplified decorative programs and reduced grave good assemblages that suggest significant constraints on available resources. The fragmentation of artistic traditions became apparent through the emergence of distinct regional styles that developed as local workshops lost contact with metropolitan standards and adapted their techniques to available materials and local preferences. Relief carvings from provincial sites during this period display increasing variations in proportional systems, iconographic conventions, and technical execution that reflect the breakdown of centralized artistic training and quality control. While these regional variations enriched Egyptian visual culture in some respects, they also indicated the weakening of cultural unity that had characterized earlier periods of strong central government. The administrative correspondence preserved from this period reveals the growing autonomy of provincial governors who found themselves forced to make independent decisions about resource allocation and crisis response when central government proved unable to provide effective coordination or adequate support. Letters between nome officials document the development of regional alliances and mutual assistance agreements that bypass traditional administrative hierarchies while addressing immediate survival needs. These arrangements, while pragmatic responses to crisis conditions, fundamentally altered the political relationships that had sustained centralized government throughout the Old Kingdom. The military implications of economic decline became apparent through changes in recruitment patterns and strategic priorities that reflected reduced governmental capabilities and shifting security concerns. The traditional system of nome-based military service became increasingly difficult to maintain when agricultural production could no longer support the population levels necessary for effective military recruitment. Provincial governors found themselves competing for limited manpower resources while addressing internal security challenges created by social unrest and resource competition. Foreign policy during this period underwent fundamental reorientation as Egypt's reduced economic capabilities limited the kingdom's ability to maintain traditional diplomatic relationships and military commitments beyond its borders. The trading expeditions to Nubia and the Levant that had provided exotic materials and enhanced royal prestige became increasingly difficult to organize and finance when domestic economic conditions required all available resources. Archaeological evidence from foreign sites that had maintained Egyptian commercial relationships reveals the gradual withdrawal of Egyptian presence and influence as the kingdom turned inward to address domestic crises. The religious implications of sustained economic hardship created theological challenges that tested traditional concepts of divine kingship and royal responsibility for maintaining cosmic order. The pharaoh's role as guarantor of Nile floods and agricultural prosperity became increasingly difficult to maintain when environmental conditions remained consistently unfavourable despite the performance of traditional rituals and the maintenance of proper religious observances. Provincial religious texts from this period reveal growing emphasis on personal piety and individual relationships with deities as communities sought spiritual explanations and solutions for problems that exceeded traditional royal capabilities. The archaeological evidence for political fragmentation during the final decades of the Old Kingdom appears in multiple forms that collectively document the breakdown of centralized authority and the emergence of competing regional power centers. Fortification walls constructed around previously open settlements indicate growing concerns about security and the need for local defense capabilities independent of central military support. Storage facilities built within residential areas suggest the hoarding of resources and the breakdown of traditional distribution networks that had connected local production with broader economic systems. Settlement patterns during this period reveal significant changes in population distribution as communities adapted to changing environmental and economic conditions. Many sites that had flourished during the prosperous periods of the Old Kingdom show evidence of abandonment or significant population reduction, while other locations experienced growth as refugees and displaced populations sought more viable living situations. The archaeological signatures of these population movements include changes in pottery assemblages, architectural styles, and burial practices that reflect the mixing of different cultural traditions and the adaptation to new social and economic circumstances. The technological adaptations and resource conservation measures that had emerged during the final decades of Pepi II's reign proved insufficient to prevent the complete breakdown of centralized pharaonic authority around 2181 BC. The death of Egypt's longest ruling pharaoh marked not merely the end of a dynasty, but the collapse of the entire political and administrative system that had governed Egypt for over 5 centuries. The succession crisis that followed Pepi II's death revealed the fundamental weakness of a governmental structure that had become entirely dependent on the personal authority of an aging monarch, whose extended reign had outlasted the administrative apparatus designed to support royal power. The immediate aftermath of Pepi II's death witnessed the rapid emergence of multiple claimants to pharaonic authority, each supported by different factions within the fragmented administrative hierarchy. Meren II, possibly Pepi II's son, managed to secure recognition in Memphis for what ancient sources describe as barely a year before disappearing from the historical record under circumstances that suggest violent removal from power. The appearance of Queen Neith-Ikriti as a ruling pharaoh reflected the desperation of royal supporters who elevated a female ruler in direct violation of traditional succession practices, indicating the complete breakdown of normal governmental procedures and the absence of viable male candidates with legitimate claims to divine kingship. The provincial governors who had accumulated substantial autonomy during the later 6th dynasty seized upon the succession crisis to assert independent control over their territories while maintaining nominal recognition of pharaonic authority. Archaeological evidence from nome capitals throughout Egypt reveals the rapid construction of fortification walls and defensive installations that transformed previously open administrative centres into militarized strongholds capable of resisting external threats. These fortifications, built with techniques derived from royal military engineering but adapted to local resources and defensive requirements, demonstrate both the technical capabilities that provincial administrators had acquired and their recognition that political authority would henceforth depend on military power rather than administrative legitimacy. The Abydos King List and other later royal records document the proliferation of competing pharaohs during the 7th and 8th dynasties, with some sources claiming that 70 rulers attempted to govern Egypt during a period of approximately 20 years. While these figures likely represent exaggerations influenced by later political propaganda, they accurately reflect the political chaos that characterized the immediate post-Old Kingdom period. Each claimant controlled limited territories around their power base, typically centered on major religious sites or strategic locations along the Nile, while lacking the resources or administrative capabilities necessary for effective kingdom-wide governance. The economic foundations that had supported Old Kingdom centralization underwent complete transformation, as the redistribution network centered on Memphis ceased to function effectively. Provincial administrators who had previously channeled local resources to central government for kingdom-wide allocation instead retained control over agricultural production and craft manufacturing within their territories. The resulting economic fragmentation created a patchwork of semi-autonomous regions, each developing independent relationships with neighbouring territories while abandoning the complex logistical systems that had characterised Old Kingdom resource management. Regional variations in economic adaptation reflected different local conditions and the varying capabilities of provincial administrators to maintain productive activities during the ongoing environmental crisis. The Delta regions, despite continued challenges from reduced flood levels, retained some agricultural productivity due to their proximity to Mediterranean trade networks and access to alternative water sources through coastal lagoons and seasonal rainfall. Upper Egyptian nomes, particularly those in the far south, maintained connections with Nubian trade networks that provided access to exotic goods and alternative economic opportunities when traditional agricultural production proved insufficient. The religious implications of political collapse created theological crises that fundamentally altered Egyptian concepts of divine kingship and royal legitimacy. The traditional understanding that pharaonic authority derived from divine appointment and cosmic necessity became increasingly difficult to maintain when multiple individuals simultaneously claimed royal status, while the kingdom experienced continued environmental and economic hardships. Provincial religious establishments found themselves forced to choose between competing royal claimants or to develop alternative theological frameworks that could justify political autonomy without completely abandoning traditional Egyptian religious concepts. The Heracleopolitan rulers who emerged as the most successful claimants to pharaonic authority during the 9th and 10th dynasties represented a new model of Egyptian kingship that acknowledged the practical limitations of centralized control while maintaining claims to legitimate royal status. Based in Heracleopolis Magna in Middle Egypt, these pharaohs controlled territories extending from the Fayum Depression to the First Cataract, encompassing many of Egypt's most productive agricultural regions and important religious centres. Their success derived not from traditional divine kingship ideology, but from pragmatic policies that balanced local autonomy with effective military coordination and economic management. The Heracleopolitan administrative system adapted Old Kingdom governmental structures to the realities of reduced territorial control and limited resources. Rather than attempting to reimpose the centralized nome system that had characterized earlier periods, Heracleopolitan pharaohs negotiated agreements with local governors who retained substantial autonomy over internal affairs while acknowledging royal authority in matters of defense, major religious observances, and interstate relations. These arrangements created federal structures that balanced central coordination with regional flexibility, enabling more effective responses to local conditions while maintaining sufficient unity for collective action against external threats. The military innovations developed during the first intermediate period reflected both the changing strategic environment and the reduced resources available for maintaining traditional Egyptian armed forces. The large-scale expeditionary armies that had characterized Old Kingdom foreign policy gave way to smaller, more flexible units optimized for rapid deployment and sustained operations with limited logistical support. Provincial militias, organized around local recruitment and commanded by regional governors with detailed knowledge of local terrain and conditions, proved more effective than centralized forces for addressing the security challenges created by political fragmentation and social unrest. Archaeological evidence from battle sites dating to this period revealed significant changes in military equipment and tactics that reflected both technological innovation and adaptation to available resources. Bronze weapons became increasingly common as metalworking techniques improved and trade networks provided access to tin sources, while composite bows and improved arrow designs enhanced the effectiveness of infantry units operating without extensive cavalry or chariot support. Fortification techniques evolved to address the specific challenges of siege warfare between Egyptian forces, with defensive installations incorporating features designed to counter traditional Egyptian military tactics. The emergence of the Theban dynasty in southern Egypt during the late 10th dynasty created the political competition that would ultimately lead to reunification under the Middle Kingdom. The Theban rulers, initially controlling only the immediate vicinity of Thebes and its associated religious establishments, gradually expanded their influence northward through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic alliance, and religious legitimation that appealed to traditional Egyptian concepts of pharaonic authority. Their success reflected both effective leadership and favourable geographic position in regions that had maintained relatively stable agricultural production during the environmental crisis. The religious significance of Thebes as the cult centre of Amun provided Theban rulers with theological advantages that enhanced their claims to legitimate pharaonic authority. The elevation of Amun to prominence during this period created alternative religious frameworks that challenged the solar theology that had dominated Old Kingdom royal ideology while maintaining connections to traditional Egyptian religious concepts. The theological synthesis developed by Theban priests combined local religious traditions with broader Egyptian theological concepts in ways that provided religious justification for political reunification under Theban leadership. The artistic and cultural developments of the First Intermediate Period reflected both the fragmentation of Old Kingdom artistic traditions and the creative adaptations that emerged from regional autonomy and cultural experimentation. Provincial workshops, no longer constrained by metropolitan standards and royal artistic programs, developed distinctive regional styles that incorporated local preferences and cultural influences while maintaining recognizably Egyptian characteristics. These regional variations enriched Egyptian visual culture while documenting the diverse cultural traditions that had been suppressed or standardized during periods of strong central control. The democratization of burial practices that had begun during the later Old Kingdom accelerated dramatically during the First Intermediate Period as traditional social hierarchies broke down and access to mortuary services expanded throughout Egyptian society. Coffin texts, derived from the royal pyramid texts but adapted for non-royal use, became widely available to individuals who could afford basic mummification and tomb preparation. These texts provided spiritual protection and afterlife guidance previously reserved for pharaonic use, creating new forms of religious expression that emphasized individual piety and personal relationships with deities rather than dependence on royal mediation. The technological innovations that emerged during this period of political fragmentation and resource scarcity demonstrated the adaptability and creativity of Egyptian craftsmen working under challenging conditions. Pottery production developed new techniques for creating high-quality ceramics, using local materials when access to traditional clay sources became unreliable due to political boundaries and transportation difficulties. Textile production adapted to available fibre sources while developing new weaving techniques that maximised efficiency and durability. Metalworking evolved to accommodate changing material availability while improving techniques for recycling and reusing existing metal objects. The international relationships maintained during the First Intermediate Period reflected Egypt's reduced political unity and economic capabilities while demonstrating the continued importance of Egyptian cultural and commercial connections throughout the ancient Near East. Individual Egyptian rulers maintained diplomatic and commercial relationships with foreign powers according to their regional capabilities and strategic interests, creating complex networks of international relationships that replaced the unified foreign policy that had characterized Old Kingdom diplomacy. These fragmented international relationships provided access to exotic materials and commercial opportunities while demonstrating Egypt's continued cultural influence despite political weakness. The literary productions of the First Intermediate Period, including works like the Admonitions of Ipuwer and the Dialogue of a Man with His Soul, reflected the social and psychological trauma created by the collapse of traditional Egyptian civilization, while documenting contemporary conditions and social attitudes. These texts, while employing literary conventions that may exaggerate actual conditions for dramatic effect, provide valuable insights into the social upheavals and cultural changes that accompanied political fragmentation. Their emphasis on social justice, individual responsibility, and the breakdown of traditional authority relationships reveals the intellectual and spiritual responses to crisis that would influence Egyptian thought throughout subsequent periods. The gradual reunification process that began under Mentuhotep II around 2055 BC drew upon lessons learned during the First Intermediate Period, while adapting successful innovations to the requirements of restored central government. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs who emerged from this reunification process incorporated federal administrative structures, regional autonomy, and military innovations developed during the period of fragmentation while re-establishing centralized coordination and royal authority. The resulting governmental system balanced central control with regional flexibility in ways that proved more resilient and adaptable than the rigid centralization that had characterized Old Kingdom administration. The lasting impact of Old Kingdom achievements on subsequent Egyptian civilization extended far beyond the immediate political and administrative structures that collapsed during the First Intermediate Period. The architectural innovations pioneered during the Pyramid Age continued to influence Egyptian building techniques throughout the pharaonic period and beyond, with later rulers regularly incorporating Old Kingdom design elements and construction methods into their own monuments. The proportional systems developed for Old Kingdom art established canonical standards that remained influential throughout ancient Egyptian history, while the theological concepts associated with the divine kingship provided religious frameworks that adapted to changing political conditions, while maintaining essential continuity with traditional Egyptian religious thought. The historical memory of the Old Kingdom as preserved in later Egyptian literature consistently portrayed this period as a golden age of prosperity, cultural achievement, and effective governance that provided models for subsequent rulers while serving as standards against which later periods were measured. Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom texts regularly refer to Old Kingdom precedents in matters of law, administration, and religious practice, while later pharaohs explicitly modelled their building programs and artistic commissions on Old Kingdom examples. This idealization of the Old Kingdom period influenced Egyptian historical consciousness throughout the pharaonic period and contributed to the cultural conservatism that characterized much of later Egyptian civilization. The archaeological legacy of Old Kingdom monuments has provided modern scholars with unparalleled insights into ancient Egyptian civilization, while demonstrating the remarkable technical and artistic achievements that characterized this formative period. The pyramids of Giza, Saqqara, and Dahshur continue to reveal new information about Old Kingdom society, technology, and religious beliefs through ongoing excavation and analysis, while the relief carvings and inscriptions preserved in mastaba tombs provide detailed documentation of daily life, economic activities, and social relationships during Egypt's first great age of cultural flowering. The preservation of these monuments has enabled detailed reconstruction of Old Kingdom civilization, while providing inspiration for continued scholarly investigation into the foundations of Egyptian culture and the origins of complex civilization in the ancient world.